Okay, members of council, we have a quorum. This meeting is now resumed. Okay, just Councillor Perks, I will acknowledge you in a minute. So, members, the mayor's second key item, we decided this morning that EX 4.1 on Toronto's transit expansion program update and next steps would be considered at 4 p.m. this afternoon. A link to the city manager's supplementary report was sent to members over the recess, and copies have been placed on your desk. Council was also advised that the public debate on appointment items CA 5.4, 5.5 would take place after the lunch recess. We will consider those items after release of member holds. I've also reviewed a number of urgent motions. Point of order, Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker. I would like to move that we recess council until 3 o'clock to give us an opportunity to read the document that was just circulated before we move to debate.
Mayor Tory?
Speaker, I'm quite happy to go along with that, but can I make a subject to, which would be that we do the vote. I think we carried over one item. We could just finish up, do the release of holds, and then have it at 3:15 or something. We allow an hour, but just do this, do these little bits of business, and I'm quite happy to do that because, quite frankly, I had anticipated that people would have the report to read over the lunch hour, which they did not, and I'm sorry they didn't, but that's fine. We are where we are, and I think that's a reasonable request.
Okay, so 3:15, but what was recommended that we vote on, first we vote on the, on page 4, CA 5.4, CA 5.5, do quick releases and introduce members' motions, and then we will recess to 3:15. Okay? On favor? Carried. Recorded? Recorded.
Councillor Fillion, please.
Councillor Thompson, we're in the middle of a vote.
Well, I just wanted to understand what we're doing because you said that we were going to vote on the items, but if we approve this, does this actually not, does it require us to then go into voting on the other items after? So should we not vote on the items first before we do this?
Well, that's what I said.
Okay, that's fine.
That's what I said.
Councillor Fillion, please.
The motion carries 19-4.
CA 5.4, Councillor Layton. Okay, so on the item on CA 5.4, Exhibition Place, recorded vote. Recorded vote.
Councillor Pasternak, please.
Well, we just moved a motion that we're going to deal with this, and then we're going to recess to 3:15.
Councillor Matlow, please.
The item carries 20-3.
On CA 5.5, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please.
Councillor Matlow, please.
The item carries 18-5.
Okay, quick releases. Deputy Mayor Minawong, do you have quick releases?
Do.
Okay.
A quick release, not releases. Sadly. Page 5, EC 3.8, authority to enter into multi-year agreements with Toronto Arts Council. I can release that.
Okay, on page 5, EC 3.8, it's been released. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Speaker. On page 6, PH 4.3, the Golden Mile Secondary Plan Study, proposed boundary expansion and status report. I can release that item.
Recorded. On page 6, PH 4.3, Golden Mile Secondary Plan Study, recorded vote.
The item carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Councillor Wong Tam, I understand that you want to reopen an item.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's on page 6, CC 6.4, 1832 Eastern Avenue, 1 Galede Place and 2 Sackville Street, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application. There's a request for directions report. I would need to reopen and just hold that down until the technical amendment is ready.
Okay. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Okay, we have some motions we're going to introduce. Councillor Perks.
Yes. Yes, this is a liquor license. It's urgent.
On
The
favor?
deadline for the application
Carried.
is imminent.
Okay, the next one, Councillor Perks.
Again, a liquor license application. As you can see, the objection date is April 25th, and we won't be meeting again as a council before that date.
There's been a request for recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please.
The motion to add the item to the agenda carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Councillor Perks.
And for the third and final time, this is a liquor license application, and the deadline for objection is between now and our next council meeting.
On favor? Carried. Mine? Okay, I have one. It's on the screen. Swim programs drowning in Toronto. All in favor? Carried. And I can't swim. Councillor Carroll?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And while I have the floor, Madam Speaker, I apologize for my absence this morning, but I just want to report to the proud Scarborough councillors that both Birchmount Hospital and General Hospital treated my father very well this morning. My motion is boilerplate Section 37, but it is urgent because the project has already been tendered, and this allows the project to proceed with the much-needed last $10,000. Thank you.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is 135 Milton Street's TLAB appeal, and it's urgent because the deadline for the appeal is April 10th, 2019.
On favor? Carried. That's it. Okay, so we'll recess to 3:15. Make sure everybody reads the report. Members of council, if you can please come into the council chambers. Okay, members of council, this meeting is now resumed. Please take your seats. Okay, we will now return to the agenda. The mayor's second key item, EX 4.1, will be considered at 4 p.m. That will give you an extra 45 minutes to read the report in case you haven't read it. So we're going to continue with the agenda. We'll go to page 5, EC 3.6, which is the noise bylaw review. Councillor Cressy held the item down. Do we have any questions to staff? Please put your name up, request a question. This is the noise bylaw. No questions? Councillor Cressy, we're on the noise bylaw. Do you have questions? Come on, Councillor Cressy, Councillor Layton, question.
I'll ask some questions, but more in the interest of spending a little time on this, because this is a critically important issue, and we barely have quorum in the room.
No, we
and I said barely, but I know that a lot of people have been working on this with their constituencies, so I'm not sure that all the motions are baked on all sides. I'm looking around for some guidance here. I'll ask a couple questions in the meantime, though.
Okay, because this is our next item on the agenda, so if we don't finish by 4 o'clock, we'll hold it down, but let's start it. We have an agenda to complete, so questions to staff.
So my first question involves the motorcycle noise. There's been some concerns that we've accepted a higher decibel of allowable for motorcycle noise. Can you just explain how we arrived at that?
Through the chair to the councillor, the motorcycle decibel level is 92, and it's the standard set by the
Society of Automotive Engineers.
Society of Automotive Engineers.
But my understanding is there's a rationale for selecting it the way we did that has to do with how it is to be enforced.
The enforcement relates to the measurement from the tailpipe when it's idling. So it's common with the association.
Why wouldn't we be measuring it when the motorcycle was active?
Sorry?
We don't have the authority to pull.
Yeah, so the challenge is having the authority to pull over a rider and enforce.
So our enforcement arm doesn't have that ability.
Through the Chair, Councillor, no, our officers do not have the authority to pull over a vehicle moving on the roadway. That's under the Highway Traffic Act. That's the Toronto Police Service has that enforcement authority. Also, we're proposing the same methodology that two other municipalities in Ontario have employed, Oakville and Caledon, which is measuring noise with a motorcycle pulled to the side of the roadway and recognizing if we're measuring by the tailpipe, a certain level, as noise travels, of course, it reduces at the point of reception. So based upon the recommendations of the Society of Automotive Engineers setting that standard and what other municipalities have looked at and how they do it, we felt that was the most practical, prudent way to approach this.
And those other municipalities had the same standard? That the level of noise was determined to be?
There's subtle variations to it, but in essence, yes. They do have some different where they rev the engine at 2,000 RPM, but then it's based upon the engine size. It gets much more complex depending upon the number of cylinders. So we took the approach that the Society of Automotive Engineers recommended through their.
Okay, thank you. The general provisions of the bylaw have really changed quite fundamentally. Can you explain the rationale for why that's the case?
So currently as it's written, the general prohibition is a catch-all clause that is it's very subjective, and we're unable to enforce it. What we're doing is bringing rigor to the process, introducing 6 different categories of noise, and then a 7th, which is unreasonable and persistent, which is going to allow us to capture other areas that we don't foresee or that could happen in the future.
So I think there's been a lot of discussion, perhaps misunderstanding of what this unreasonable and persistent noise is and how it will be monitored and enforced. Can you get into that a little bit?
Mark, because it's enforcement.
Can I just say I love the uniform?
I knew you were going to say that.
Mark,
Thank you.
I love the uniform.
Thank you.
Stepping it up a notch for all of us. Thank you very much, Mark.
Oh, thank you. So the approach we've taken, I think there has been misunderstanding from the current noise bylaw that has a general prohibition, but that general prohibition does not overrule existing restrictions that exist in the current bylaw. So it's to catch those noises that are currently not regulated. We've brought this forward, the same concept. All we've done is built a bit more clarity about what noise will, if it's not prohibited by hours or sound level. We're having some rigor around how we can be more consistently approaching what's an unreasonable and persistent noise versus somebody makes a noise once and somebody wants to take issue with it. It will help us manage those because currently we get complaints from residents that somebody did something, a one-time issue, and we're tying up our resources investigating something that we truly don't need to be investigating. But if it's an ongoing, unnecessary, and persistent noise, we want to have an ability to do enforcement on those types of noise situations.
Thank you. That was your last question. Councillor Fletcher.
This is just a question that I've had for a while as far as ticketing for noise. And it's my understanding and my experience that I could send an email without any identifying factors to you and say there's noise at such and such a place or such and such a bar, and then that will become a recognized occurrence in municipal licensing and standards.
Through the chair to Councillor Fletcher. So our current practice is when we get a noise complaint, we send out what's called an advisory notice to the person that is believed to have been causing the noise, reminding them or informing them of we've received a complaint and what the rules are. That's not an enforcement action whatsoever. That's us as a courtesy of us trying to remind people of the rules. Should we receive multiple complaints, or if we think that the initial complaint warrants an investigation, we will investigate, and if we ultimately do find violations, we can either issue somebody a ticket or we can lay charges under Part 3 of the Provincial Offences Act, and they can be taken to court.
I'm just dealing with my experience with one of my businesses on Queen Street, where someone had sent an email, unidentified, perhaps vexatious or vengeful, at which point someone decided to have a look at it, but took that as a prior offense in dealing with any noise coming from that location. Are you aware of that in the past? Is that your standard?
That is not our
happen?
standard. Sorry, Councillor. An offense is when we've laid a charge.
Would you be willing to look into that
Absolutely.
occurrence?
Absolutely.
Because do you think it's fair if I make up a name and send it to you and say it's very noisy at such and such a place, and might not be, but I may have a bone to pick with that business, but now they're on your radar as having a problem. And maybe they do have a problem later, and the file shows that they had a noise complaint which may have been unsubstantiated, which of course I think in your review has some weight.
Yep.
Be honest with me, it has weight, doesn't it?
No, Councillor, if we find a violation, it's a violation. Just because we get a complaint about noise, if there's no substantiation of a violation, doesn't matter. We get lots of complaints in the law of different things.
You'd be willing to review that?
We'll review it, absolutely.
Because I will speak about it,
Yep.
because it's unfair to businesses, actually,
Yep.
what has been happening
Yep.
in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to follow up on some of Councillor Layton's questions with regard to motorcycle noise. So just to summarize, you can't stop a motorcycle that's moving, and you can only sort of issue an offense if a motorcycle is stationary, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. And to be clear, Councillor, and again, looking at what the other municipalities do, if we're going to be doing a noise enforcement for noisy motorcycles, it would be a planned event with conjunction with Toronto Police, because we will not be staying at the side of the road waiting for a motorcycle to come to a stop. It would be similar to like a ride check that they do, that if we have areas where we know that that's a persistent, ongoing problem, we would arrange to have a coordinated enforcement with TPS there to assist us to pull over the motorcycles so we could, in fact, do the noise measurement readings.
So,
that's how other municipalities do employ
So
it as well.
we can agree then that the police have to be involved in this because they're the only ones that can stop a motorcycle when it's actually making noise, a lot of noise, when it's moving, when it's going down the Don Valley Parkway and revving its engines.
That's correct.
Okay, so because this is an arrangement that is a common occurrence in my area, especially late at night on the Don Valley Parkway. So how often does the Toronto Police Service actually, put on those noise sensors to measure the noise? How often do they do that? How often do they plan to do that? How often did they do it last year, for example? How, did they go out there and try and catch motorcycles and other, loud engines?
So, Councillor, currently the noise bylaw does not have that provision in it. This is a new provision proposed in this noise bylaw. So this is a brand new provision and requirement, so that we have no previous experience on doing this enforcement or how often or how frequent. So should Council adopt this, the bylaw will come into effect on October 1st, is what staff is recommending. So it wouldn't be until the fall of this year or possibly into early next year that we actually would be gearing up with enforcement strategies with TPS.
So prior to today, they could, rev their engines as loud as they like, and there wasn't any.
Currently, the Highway Traffic Act does have provisions about an operator of a motor vehicle making unnecessary noise.
Yeah.
That's subjective, and again, that's purely under the Highway Traffic Act, which Toronto Police Service are they enforce that provision.
So, October seems a long way off, and it'll be troublesome this summer because, you know, folks, drivers, owners of cars that make loud noises, you know, I think they're typically known to want to rev their engines on warm summer evenings. Yes, and so there's no. So you're proposing October the 1st. Is there any way you could accelerate that to give some relief to communities that will suffer through this all summer?
Yeah, so it's a fair question. I understand where you're coming from. The reason we build in the longer lead time is to do the necessary education to the various industries involved in noise. We need to train our officers. We need to operationalize how we're going to do this. We need to purchase the noise meters. We need to do a number of things in the next few months, and that's why we build in a reasonable lead time that allows us to do this the right way. We've made mistakes in the past by being too aggressive and doing something immediately. We think this builds in the appropriate amount of time, but I understand your concern.
You couldn't buy a couple or a few for, I'm being quite serious.
Yep.
On the Don Valley Parkway, it's a big deal. And I remember last year the mayor was talking about doing something about, you know, a lot noise on major roadways. Is there any chance we could get this going a little bit earlier? I don't know what you mean by notifying various industries per se. The noise-making industry, I'm not familiar with that.
The industry I'm referring to is, there's a number of categories. There's the music industry, there's the construction industry, bars and restaurants, many people, the landscape industry with equipment. So there's a number of different players in this area. It's the will of council on when they would like it to be adopted or to come into force and effect, but we recommend October 1st.
Are they hard? The hardest thing to do would be to buy the equipment. Are they readily available, or do you have to place an order and wait a number of months to receive the equipment?
It's readily available. We'd have to purchase them. I'm not sure they're off the shelf, but there is some lead time in there.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just going to ask staff about, I've got in front of me a few letters, correspondence from various organizations, the Toronto Noise Coalition, FONTRA, the Financial District. They're concerned about a number of things, asking for additional consultation. Can you just enlighten me, because I haven't really followed this process. Why would they be have you read this correspondence, and why are they expressing these concerns?
Yes, I have. This has been a lengthy process over 5 years, and a number of consultations. We had a noise working group that met a number of times. Many of those were members of them. We then held 2 meetings in between committee and council, clarified a number of options. They're not in full agreement with what we're doing, but we feel strongly that what we're introducing is some rigor to the process that is not there right now. It's a stronger bylaw, and we feel it's important to move forward with it.
Okay, and I'll ask you just a quick question about leaf blowing. So Councillor Mihevc and Councillor McMahon and I were, we were having meetings last term about this issue. All of our wards, former wards, were deeply affected by that. Some neighbours experiencing 2 or 3 leaf blowers at one time. I think it's fairly well known the impacts of that level of noise on people's health, etc., and also the environment. So what have you done to address leaf blowing in neighbourhoods? I understand some cities have been very aggressive on this matter, some cities throughout the world.
Cities in Western Canada, I believe Westmount and another municipality outside Vancouver have actually banned them. We did not recommend a ban. We have decibel limits that they are to adhere to. Again, we met with the industry, we met with residents group. I was in a meeting with yourself and Councillor Mihevc a couple of years ago on this. We're well aware of the issue, but we feel that the bylaw, and one of the requirements in it now, is about landscaping equipment, that it will help us enforce this.
How will it help?
Because currently we don't have a tool with a decibel level to say you're over a certain level. Sorry, decibel limits, I was confusing it with another matter. This restricts it by time between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. and then at 8 on Saturdays.
And so that regulation wasn't in place before for leaf blowing?
So we shortened it by 2 hours. It went into 9 o'clock in the evening in the current bylaw as it is right now.
So for those people who, and I get lots of emails from various neighborhoods on this issue, because obviously a lot of my neighborhoods have very big lots and landscapers, etc. So that literally come in with the big guns, like 2 or 3 at a time. So you're saying really the only alteration has been reduction of hours by 2 hours on weekdays? Anything on weekends?
It's not permitted on Sunday, and then it's 9 a.m. on Saturdays.
So it's not permitted at all on Sundays?
No, it is. It is permitted.
Sorry, it is permitted on Sundays.
And what hours?
9 till 7.
So could you just summarize by telling us what exactly has changed from, if this is adopted, what has changed?
So it's mainly the 2-hour change from the evening. It used to be till 9 o'clock at night. Now it will be 7 till 9. It'll be 2 hours less on weekdays and 1 hour later on weekends.
And what time can they start in the morning?
7 a.m. Monday to Friday, 9 till 7 on Saturday.
So that aligns with the noise bylaw generally.
Correct.
And so they can blow on the weekends too. That hasn't been altered. Just 2 hours across the board.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Leafs can blow on the weekend.
Thank you.
Leafs can.
Councillor Matlow.
On one side of the coin, it's having the noise bylaw itself. The other side is the enforcement of the noise bylaw. And we've had a number of discussions about this. My understanding is that there are allocated funds that are unspent to hire, I believe, an additional 10 or so bylaw enforcement officers. Would you clarify where we are at with respect to hiring and to ensure that we are able to provide more reasonable response times?
Through the chair to Councillor Matlow, it is a constant, like a lot of other divisions in the city, we have a constant churn of staff leaving, and it takes us time to fill them. So there is always gaps in our complement of officers available. For instance, we're currently going through a hiring process right now to hire 25 new additional officers to replace those that have left. So come August, we'll have them in place, trained and ready to go. However, again, between now and then, we're going to have other staff that retire or leave for other opportunities. So we are looking at how we can be more effective at filling those vacancies quicker, and we've put in place some new strategies for that. But we do have some level of vacancies in our officer complement.
I've heard musings about new strategies, and I wonder if you could articulate what they might be. And the reason I ask is that, and I looked at many of my colleagues, and I imagine most of us, if not all of us, share this experience where we and the city tell residents if there's a noise bylaw violation, you're expected to call 311. So they call 311, and then they get somebody at 311 telling them that somebody might be able to come by within 5 days to investigate, which neither responds to the incident that night that's keeping them up all night, for example. Let's say some contractor decides 2 in the morning is a great time to build a high-rise, or early on a Sunday or whatever, but then there's no ability to actually compile any evidence to prosecute. So is there, so then it actually frustrates residents even more, because then they call expecting help and then there's none to be provided. Is there a plan to be able in a more timely way respond to legitimate noise bylaw violation complaints?
So through the chair to councillor, yes, if it's an ongoing repetitive type of noise situation, we can investigate, we do investigate, and we deal with those. If somebody makes a noise one time in the middle of the night, we're not first responders. We're not going to be able to dispatch officers immediately for those instances, and we've never been able to, and we're not going to be able to do that on a go-forward basis. But if it's noise that is occurring on a repetitive basis, we will definitely have the resources and the ability for our officers to respond. And we have made changes to our hours of operations for our officers. And again, we're looking at some other ways of how we can be more effectively utilize our resources to have our officers.
So then let's go back to the other, thank you for that. And so let's go back to the other side of the coin. So if we need to then mitigate the expectations on what enforcement can or would be willing to do, then the policy itself needs to be strong. The noise coalition, the group of residents who have been most engaged in this discussion, are they satisfied with the outcome, or have they requested that there be 2 months, a 2-month deferral, so that there is an opportunity to address some of the outstanding issues that have not been resolved?
So there has been discussion of a deferral. Meeting over the next 2 months, I'm not sure will get us any further. We feel strongly that we've put together, again, years worth of work. It's important for us to move this forward. A deferral, I don't think it's very challenging on this file to get to a common ground. We feel like we have a balanced approach and a new objective measures. So we feel we can get there, but meeting for 2 more months, I'm not sure we'd be any further.
Well, you're one party at the table, right? So I appreciate that's your opinion, and frankly, you wouldn't be recommending your recommendations if you didn't believe they were the recommendations we should consider. Right. That being said, just true or false, the other party at the table, or at least a significant stakeholder, the Toronto Noise Coalition, have they not said, though, that they would prefer to have simply 2 additional months to resolve the outstanding issues? Is that not what they are formally requesting?
I haven't read every communication, but I believe I've heard of the word deferral.
Yes, they've had.
Deferral, yes.
Okay, that was your last question. Councillor Pasternak? Questions?
I'm not going to move to defer. I'm not going to vote for this. I'm just going to tell people the bylaw in the hand is what.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Just very briefly, I know 2 councillors have previously touched on motorcycles and sound levels. Now, it's my understanding that the federal government controls emission standards, manufacturing standards, importing of spare parts, almost the entire construction and composition of a motorcycle, and that would include the noise that it emits. What authority do we have to reverse a federally approved product?
We do not. This deals with aftermarket mufflers.
So these
people who modify their mufflers either on their car or their motorcycle to enhance the noise.
So they have actually altered the regulatory framework. They have taken something and souped it up. Okay, fair enough. And we're quite limited on what we can do to stop that.
That's correct.
Most of our construction, the noise bylaws is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Now, what I find happening is even construction sites that conform to that rule, they have their trucks all lined up down the street with their engines running, waiting to start work. So they can be sitting there at 6 a.m. With the engines running, particularly in the wintertime. Is there anything embedded in the regulations before us that prevents them from running their engines? And this is sometimes 10, 15 trucks down a residential street waiting to launch at 7 a.m. Is there anything we can do to stop that?
Through the councillor, so the city does have an idling bylaw that would regulate and address that issue with trucks queuing up and idling on roadways. So there is already mechanisms in place to address that. The noise bylaw would not be geared for that.
And in the past couple of years, how many charges have been laid under the idling bylaw?
That I can't speak to, unfortunately. That's our transportation services does the enforcement on that bylaw, so I don't have answers for you there, I'm afraid.
It would be fairly minimal, or?
I can't speculate on that.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff, I wonder if you could explain to me the concept or the term continuous pour.
Through the chair to Councillor Thompson. So that's where, this is speaking specifically to mostly in large projects, high-rises in particular. Once they start pouring the concrete and it's been placed, they have to complete the process, which includes floating or leveling of the concrete, polishing it, the surface. So that can take numerous hours because it's a chemical reaction. So concrete, when it comes out of the truck, once they start that process, until they finish floating or leveling that concrete, that's the continuous pour.
So the noise isn't from the pour itself, it is part of the extension of the work that has to be done to complete the, I guess, smoothing out and actually to ensure that the concrete itself is set and it's firm. And that process can't be stopped once it's started, is that correct?
That's correct. It cannot stop
Right.
once
And
they
so
start.
how are you planning as part of this bylaw to deal with that process?
So currently our current noise bylaw provides an outright exemption for continuous concrete pours.
Yep.
What we are proposing is saying if you need to work after the permitted hours of 7 p.m. for construction work, or
Yep.
sorry, 11 p.m. for construction work, that you'll need a noise exemption permit from us. Not that you can't do it, it's just that we want the industry to come and seek that permit, which may include a mitigation plan on how you're going to minimize that noise disruption on adjacent residential properties.
So the from us, do you mean councillors or do you mean staff? Because I'm afraid that I don't want to see a situation where it actually comes to a councillor to make that particular decision, because that councillor may have certain idiosyncrasies and so on and so forth. He or she may not adequately want to deal with that particular process. So should it not be staff that actually, the executive director, or whoever it else, that is dealing with this particular matter and not left to the whim or the fancy of councillors?
So the current bylaw as proposed would have the councillors having to comment on a noise exemption application.
Right.
But of course, that is always subject to the will of council as to what the ultimate bylaw has in it. So if you want...
And so can you then help me to understand, the current bylaw has certain requirement with respect to residents actually keeping a log. Will this be continued as part of the proposed amendment to the bylaw?
So the residents keeping a noise log, that's a form of evidence that should we be laying of a charge. If the noise is intermittent and indeterminate period of time and our officers can't be there to observe it themselves, that can be a form of evidence that could be submitted for as part of a prosecution case on behalf of the affected parties.
So you're telling me, because many residents now don't want to keep that log. That's my experience with them. And are you suggesting then that the information that you're talking about would be applicable in court? Would that not be hearsay?
The part of the process is if it's a log recorded by the resident, they would have to come and speak to their evidence.
Right.
That is their choice, and some residents do, in fact, come and do that. We understand not everybody wants to do that, so that's why we tried to build the bylaw that has a bit more quantitative measures in it versus a subjective, it was disturbing me provision.
When I looked at the New York bylaw and they talked about the process with respect to noise mitigation and so on, it seemed that they have a little bit more, I'll use the expression, teeth to their request for plans. Ours is not as strong. I'm just wondering why.
So we were looking at trying to balance out and not be adding some impediments to the industry, but balancing out the interests of the residents. So our bylaw says if you're going to make noise during the permitted hours, construction noise can exist and occur. If you're going to make construction noise after the hours permitted, then you'll have to have a noise exemption from us, and part of that would require, at the discretion of our department, our staff, a noise mitigation plan to be submitted on how you're going to inform affected residents or do things to mitigate that. Noise barriers, temporary acoustical barriers around generators, or it may be as simple as making sure people who are going to be affected on a specific day know that this is going to happen so they can plan their lives around it.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you. And actually, my question was similar to Councillor Thompson's question. So the complaints I get, especially in the summer, is the noise bylaw where people are in their backyards with tents, having parties, music, amplified music, drinking, and you know, the police are called, of course, and the police, well, you know, it's a noise bylaw, and they really don't lay any charges. But we have told our residents that they need to, and as Councillor Thompson's question, is that they have to log it. and they have to go to court. And a lot of residents, they feel intimidated by doing that, and they're not going to get up at 2 or 3 in the morning and start logging noises. Now, if you have a location, if it may be a bar or a residential home where it's ongoing on weekends, like, is there anything that we can do other than tell the resident to start logging the noises?
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult.
Through the Deputy Chair to Councillor Nunziata. So if it's an ongoing occurrence, such as a restaurant or a bar, we definitely will have officers there to do that observation and measurement. We have officers in the bylaw enforcement group that work until 3 a.m. on the weekends. We can make our officers available to be there when the noise is being created if we know it's going to be created on a specific day consistently. If it's a one-off occurrence that occurs once in a blue moon, then that's a problem for us and challenging for us, and that's where we sometimes will rely upon the residents to help us with that. Again, we're looking at different technologies now. Everybody has a phone. They can record noise and sounds. That may be sufficient for submitting as evidence. We're looking at how we can minimize residents having to come to testify in court, but there are unfortunately some instances where that will be our only evidence.
And it's a long process. If you ask a resident to log and then it goes to court, sometimes it takes months, even years, to go through the courts. Now, when you're going to the bars, to the after-hour clubs that are open all night, and so do you also coordinate your inspection with the AGCO and the police, because under the Liquor Act as well, right? You can lay charges?
Hi. Through the chair, yes. I mean, we do blitzes all the time with that include both the police and the AGCO. The liquor offenses would, of course, be under the jurisdiction of both the police and the AGCO can lay charges in relation to the Liquor License Act. We can lay charges under the bylaw for the noise issue, and in fact, if the business is operating and should be licensed as a business, that's another area that we can enforce.
So it is a good idea when we have members' motions coming through council on liquor licenses and putting conditions on liquor licenses that after a certain hour that they can't, well, of course you can't serve, but there's no noise, you have to close up the establishment. So those conditions on liquor licenses also help as far as the enforcement end, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. As much clarity and as much understanding that the permit holder can receive and the enforcement side can have, the better. The better clarity and the better specificity, the better.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Tory had questions? Are you ready to question?
Sorry, Speaker.
No problem.
Yes, I had a couple of questions. One, just on process. I wondered if you could comment. There are those who say, and there's been discussion going around the City Hall that I've been sort of hearing about in my own office about if we spent more time on this, and I keep hearing various reactions ranging all the way up to and including self-harm but on the part of the officials in terms of their attitude about that. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether you thought more time was going to lead us to any better, different, clearer, more effective recommendations than what we have in front of us from you.
I don't believe so. I believe we've gone through a very thorough process. We've had over 20 public meetings, including 5 just this year, which were facilitated by our third-party facilitator, again, to try to get a common ground. We have done numerous studies, numerous surveys, numerous consultations, 7 noise working group meetings. We have met over and over again, and we feel that what we have put forward is a workable piece. It is balanced. Does it make everyone a little unhappy? Yes. But it is a workable piece that is enforceable, that is far more objective and quantitative than the current one, which is subjective. Meeting for 2 more months, I don't believe, this is my personal opinion and opinion of staff who've been working on this for years, that I don't see it moving us any further along.
So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you would say that at this stage, all things being said, including the fact that you acknowledge not everybody's going to be happy that it's time for us to punt on this, you know, one way or another, and that another 3 or 4 months or 6 months or 2 months or 10 more meetings is not going to necessarily result in any different result because you've done so much so far.
That's correct, and we met in between committee and council. We clarified a number of pieces, the rationale behind our on the 10 major items. Again, not full agreement, but on a file like this is not one where we can get full agreement and have everyone enjoying it. People feel that it's better, it's an improvement, and I think we need to move forward.
All right. Now, my other question was kind of along the same lines as Councillor Robinson had asked in respect of some aspects of this regulation. I'd like you to narrow yourself down, if you would be so kind. And that is a particular interest I've had in the noise caused by motorcycles and cars. You know, when somebody's doing the concrete pour for a building, at least the result of that is a place to live or a place to work or a place to shop. There's a building that comes out of that. When it's people who are revving engines on motorcycles or cars, my wife Barb would argue the only result of that is addressing some of the obvious inadequacies or feelings of inadequacy of the people who are revving the engines. So my question is, could you summarize for us what changes are recommended here, because they're sort of sprinkled through. What changes are recommended here, just like Councillor Robinson asked you to do earlier on a different segment of this, and how do you feel this will improve our ability to enforce the law? Because I think right now, short of having police available, which we know for this kind of thing is difficult, it's very difficult for our people, the city's people, to enforce the law. So what changes are we making, and how will it make it easier for anybody to enforce the law to discourage these people from this antisocial activity?
Right. So again, very challenging. It is. You're right. There's no result from it. It is an annoying thing. It is something that commonly happens on Yonge Street in Yorkville and different parts of the city where people, on the Don Valley Parkway and on ramps, people try to rev it up even louder. What this bylaw does is, for the first time, give specificity to a decibel level, 92 decibels for motorcycles, which it did not in the past.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask on the enforcement piece. I mean, the bottom line, I guess, since you didn't say otherwise, is it's not really going to make it much easier. I mean, right now, a moving vehicle can only be stopped by a police officer. That isn't going to change, and this level will make it a bit easier for us if we can sort of happen to catch a person in the act, as it were, sitting somewhere still or whatever, but it really isn't going to help with the enforcement then.
So as we look to operationalize this over the next few months, what we would look to partner with the Toronto Police and to have blitzes in certain parts of the city where this does happen, and to work with the police to pull those people over and have that blitz and in a 4-hour period lay so many charges on different pieces, which would then educate other people doing that this isn't an acceptable behavior.
This is a question, do you promise? Because quite a few areas in the city now, I think, as you know, I'm sure you're aware of that, aren't you? That there are quite a few, it's not limited to any one area. There's 4 or 5 areas where this happens.
Yeah, we've been in discussions with the police. I can't commit to numbers, but it is something we will continue to pursue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've talked a lot about some very specific situations, but the vast majority of people in the city don't call 311. I want to zoom in exactly how this affects your typical homeowner. Typically, the people that I represent a lot, some in high-rise, some not. So if I want to cut my grass on Labor Day, can I do that?
Yes, you can.
Okay, and what are the hours I can do that?
9 till 7.
9 till 7, so that is Saturday, Sunday, and stat holidays.
That's correct.
And I want to cut my grass on a weekday evening. When do I have to shut my lawnmower off?
7 p.m.
7 p.m. And then what is the breadth of things that are included in power equipment? Would that include hedge trimmers, power washers, battery-powered hedge trimmers?
Yes.
So all mechanical equipment.
We tried to, we specify landscape equipment.
Okay.
We tried to be specific on a number of the pieces that you've raised.
But effectively, I'm going to communicate coming out of council. The new rule is, at least the big change is you need to stop by 7. And if you don't, it's potentially a $5,000 fine, if I've read in there.
That's correct. A big part of this is education, and we need to do a better job at educating the public and industry on what you can and cannot do.
A couple of years ago, on New Year's Eve, the power went out. And we had family over, and fortunately I was lucky enough we had a generator, hauled that out, started the generator. What happens in the situation of a power outage and somebody's running a generator at night or after hours? Is there an exemption, or is that something you wouldn't prioritize in your enforcement? How does that work?
Generators are exempted from the bylaw.
And that's because it's for emergencies, or? Okay.
Correct.
Excellent. Second question, the biggest noise complaints I get out in Ward 2 has to do with aircraft noise. And that's, maybe it's related to transportation noise in general. What does this noise bylaw do in relation to something like an aircraft noise that, and if you've lived under a flight path or near a flight path, you can appreciate it is very, very loud and it is very, very repetitive. Do we have any relief in that?
The city bylaw does not. This is governed by Aviation Canada and the federal government.
So why couldn't the bylaw address something like that? It's coming out of a vehicle, right? In the same way that noise would be coming out of a loud car or a truck, or ambient noise coming off the 427 highway.
Yeah, I understand your question. Again, it would, because it's regulated federally, you can't frustrate it with a municipal bylaw.
I see. So the federal regulation takes precedent over anything that we could put in place.
That's my understanding, correct?
Very good. So the last is, I know there's a dialogue about continuous pour. Could you tell me, would you be, as a regulator, pretty comfortable in getting very specific about what the activities are associated with continuous pour? And we talked about them today. It's the delivery of the concrete, the finishing. And in my experience, sometimes it's activities outside of the continuous pour that look like they're part of it. Do you feel comfortable as a regulator that you're able to discern exactly what is within that envelope of that operation?
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Holiday, sorry. Yes, if we were investigating a noise complaint, our officers do know and can distinguish what activities are associated with the continuous pour operation versus general construction otherwise.
Okay. And one other sort of piece that I had detected in the reading of this and speaking to others was, maybe the industry is a little concerned about the process around the exemption or not exempting a particular operation related to construction or continuous pour. Can you tell me, does council have ultimate power? And let's put aside the regulatory changes that we've got here or what we've got today. Could council cancel a noise permit or a noise exemption at some point in time if there was something obnoxious going on? And, I will add to that it's not, one bad thing on one weekend, but there was a project that was really not working. Could we address that through a notice of motion or some other thing on the floor here to deal with those real problematic projects?
So, through the chair to Councillor Holiday, the noise bylaw we're proposing does have a revocation provision, revocation provision in it for noise exemption permits. Currently, we do not have such authority, so that is a new piece that we've recognized we need. It would not be council's at their discretion. It would be with the executive director to do the revocation, because it's the executive director that ultimately is issuing the noise exemption. But needless to say, should we receive a complaint from anybody, whether it's a councillor or a resident, about a noise issue associated with a noise exemption permit, we would investigate it to see if they're complying with the terms of conditions, and if in fact there's some unintended impacts or consequences, we would take those into consideration.
Thank you. So that's the end of the questions. We'll hold the item down for the speakers, and we'll now go to the item, the mayor's key item, which is EX 4.1. If we can clear the screen, please. Is that from just now? Oh. Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay, Councillor Robinson, questions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My first question would be to our city manager, just regarding the announcement last week about the $1.1 billion over the 10 years. How critical is it for the TTC to have that money reinstated by the province? How will it impact our state of good repair, capital program, our fleet, our bus improvements, our track upgrades? What kind of impact does this have on the system?
Through the Speaker, it's substantial. As you know, there was a $33.5 billion report that was tabled to the board, $20 billion of which relates to the subway system itself, which we'll be talking about. So it is fundamentally important.
And over the long term, what kind of impact would it have on the system as it stands, the current system, our existing system versus the expansion?
Well, again, it hits directly on the current system, and we are falling behind in terms of the amount of investment that should be making in that system. So, you know, as it relates to losing over $1 billion, it's, you know, we would hope to have at least been status quo and be working at the table to negotiate more money from the province to assist with the state of good repair challenge that we have.
Thank you. Just related to the relief line, we've heard these. We've heard many overtures about state-of-the-art technology, freestanding. You and I actually had this exchange a few weeks ago at our last council meeting. I know we've done geotechnical studies about digging deep. They're talking about maybe not digging so deep and the impacts of that. Smaller vehicles, would that bring forward capacity issues? They're talking about 36 to 40 trains. I question headways between trains, if that's even feasible. I know we've been working on getting to 30 trains, and quite excited about that. That's huge for us. So I just have to question some of these overtures related to the technology, and if you could just expand on that for us.
So if I can, through the Speaker, I don't know if we're much further ahead than we were when we talked a couple of weeks ago in terms of having a detailed understanding of exactly what is being proposed. I know later this week there will be a technical briefing provided by the province that will give us a better understanding of specifics around, I would hope, everything from the elevation of the tunneling to the technology to other things that you're referring to. So again, that's, you know, it's all important information for us to understand and be able to report back on.
Okay, the Bloor-Young Station capacity improvements, which we've talked about at, I think, both at Council and at TTC, the Commission, I don't really see that emphasized in here at all, or the province really paying attention to that critical need of that station capacity improvements. Has the province spoken to you about that or approved that, or where does that sit on the agenda?
I can say the conversations that we had at the table where we've emphasized the need to address existing capacity issues, i.e. congestion and related health and safety impacts, have been certainly the subject of talks at the table. We have stressed that you know, some of our priorities ought to be in addressing the relief of the congestion as well as the platform itself at Bloor and Young. So that certainly has been conversations that staff have had. Now, in terms of specifics, I know they reference, and we mentioned in our report, that that station will be evaluated, but beyond that, we don't really have any other kind of firm commitment.
Okay, and my next question would be about PTIF. So how important is it that we take advantage of the PTIF funding before this upcoming election?
I would say, through the chair, obviously very important. And,
very important.
Hence the reason why we identified priorities, and hence the reason why we have provided in their supplemental a need to better understand what the province is considering in terms of the projects that we've listed in our PTIF application.
So there's a time crunch.
Correct.
We're really under that. Lastly, I would ask you, I'm very happy to see on page 3, item B, talking about sunk costs. How likely is it that there would be reimbursement of those sunk costs?
Through the chair, I will always remain optimistic.
Well, good for you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll begin by addressing my questions to the City Manager. Do we have a City Council-approved transit expansion plan today?
Through the Speaker, yes, you do.
We do. Does the recently released map by the province alter the city's transit expansion plan?
Through the Speaker, yes, it does.
Okay. In your recommendations in the report here, the supplementary report and recommendations, are you asking us to endorse in any way the province's proposed expansion plan, their new map?
If I can, through the Speaker, I think what we're suggesting to you is that we have a lot of questions to ask before we'd ever be in a position to, as staff, recommend an endorsement. So that's how we've worded it, and that's what we're expecting to do.
So, just to be clear, with the recommendations you have in front of us, you are not asking Council to in any manner endorse the transit expansion map that the Premier has released?
Through the Speaker, correct.
Okay. I'll direct my questions now to the TTC or City Planning, whoever sees fit. You guys are all great. Will the announced reversal to a 3-stop subway in Scarborough, if that were to proceed, will it delay the building of transit in Scarborough?
Through the Speaker, yes it will, and that's been acknowledged within the Ontario budget report.
What did the Ontario budget report state?
They said it would be the Scarborough would come in 2030.
Instead of?
2027.
3 years delay. So is that correct? The provincial plan would result in a 3-year delay for transit in Scarborough.
Well, what they actually said was 1 to 2 year delay, but they did mention 2030 in their report.
Okay. So the province itself has publicly acknowledged that their plan will result in somewhere between a 2 and 3 year delay for transit in Scarborough.
I would suggest it's 1 to 2 years.
1 to 2 years.
Yes.
Okay. The Eglinton West Tunnel that is included in the provincial map, will that delay transit along the Mount Dennis and Central Etobicoke corridor?
Through the Speaker, that would take longer to build, yes, than an at-grade LRT.
Okay, so the provincial map released would result in a delay in transit in Mount Dennis and Central Etobicoke. Is that correct?
Through the Speaker, yes.
Thank you. The downtown relief line, the objective of the downtown relief line is to relieve capacity on Line 1 and to increase ridership as well. Is that correct?
Through the Chair, yes, that is correct.
Okay. The provincial map that has been released, do we know at this time whether the Ontario line, as announced, would accomplish either of those? Either relieving capacity on Line 1 or increasing ridership?
Through the Chair, we do not know the details of the technology they are suggesting, nor do we then know the capacity of the line that they're proposing.
So is there a chance that the technology that is suggested would in fact not provide relief to Line 1?
There's a chance either way, yes, that could be true.
Thank you very much. As it relates to Smart Track, the province, and I see in page 1 of the report, the province Smart Track stations are not included in the provincial transit map. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So what does it mean for the city what does it mean for the implementation of Smart Track if those stations are not included in the province's transit map?
Through the Speaker, that remains unclear.
Okay. To the TTC, we have a state of good repair backlog currently in the TTC.
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
And it is in the amount of, what is the current amount of our estimated state of good repair backlog?
The backlog of state of good repair and growth, we combine them both, and the CIP is $33.5 billion, of which approximately $10 billion is funded.
$33.5 billion. $10 billion is funded. So we have a $23 billion gap. Now, you said for state of good repair and growth. What does growth mean?
Growth would mean that as we retire our older vehicles, we buy a few more in addition to those we retire to address the growth in the system and ridership.
Okay. If someone were to offer to give you a check tomorrow to support transit in this city, what would you want to use that check for?
I'd like to use that check for buying new buses, overhauling existing buses, doing work to streetcars, new streetcars, track, signal work, power upgrades.
So if you had a choice tomorrow and somebody was coming with a check for $23 billion, would you rather that go towards state of good repair and growth or new expansion lines?
I focus on state of good repair and growth to begin with.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
you. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. I want to pursue a little further the line of questioning that Councillor Cressy finished on with Mr. Leary. Is there any point to adding new routes if you are unable to maintain the existing system?
Through you, Chair. A number of the new routes will divert ridership from Line 1, for instance, to the new service, and that we do support, in addition to maintaining the state of good repair.
In addition. But,
yeah, absolutely.
So I guess the question, to be more precise, if you're unable to maintain lines 1 and 2 in a state of good repair, unable to maintain the rolling stock that you've got, unable to make sure that the signaling and switching is in a state of good repair, is there any point in adding new extensions on the rest of the system?
I would say that, again, my focus on state of good repair would make me nervous in diverting funding for expansion as opposed to state of good repair.
In 2003, the City of Toronto and the Commission directed the TTC staff to go look at what would be the most cost-effective ways to invest in public transit. And if I recall, the top 3 things mentioned were investing in a state of good repair, expanding the amount of rolling stock, and running more surface. And only then looking at expanding to new lines. Am I recalling correctly?
That is correct. That was the 2003 Ridership Growth Strategy Report at the TTC.
And would you say, I believe we're in a similar situation right now. We've got a serious state of good repair backlog. We're short, at least on the streetcar fleet and the bus fleet, to my understanding. We are short on funding state of good repair. Would you have similar recommendations today? In other words, invest in state of good repair, rolling stock, and service frequency first?
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the Speaker, to the City Manager, based on your supplementary recommendations here in the report, am I correct in understanding that right now you're asking Council to assess the province's transit proposal, get more information, answer those 61 questions that you've outlined here, the principles for cost sharing, and then based on that and those outcomes of those discussions, have Council decide whether or not to endorse the PTIF funding for transit proposal as modified by the province?
Through the Speaker, that's correct.
Okay, it's a little confusing. There's a lot of stuff there. We just got it, but thank you for that clarification. Item number 2, recommendation number 2, specifically, could you explain why in particular you're asking us to make a conditional endorsement of the province's proposal now, why we would do this rather than waiting to see your recommendations in the report come back from recommendation 1?
So again, through the Speaker, we think, as pointed out in recommendation 1 and further elaborated on in recommendation 2, we believe there's a lot of information that you require before you're going to make a commitment that adheres to the provincial announcement. So we are not. It's conditional on all the homework that we've identified being done, and us bringing it back to you before you make a decision.
Okay. I would agree with that. To clarify, the province's April 10th transit proposal that came forward, to what extent were we, the City of Toronto, consulted with in the development of that new plan?
I mean, we had heard, as you know, back in March 22nd and the 26th that there was going to be expansions. They did identify that. In terms of specifics, we learned, as everyone else did, when the announcement was made, the extent of certainly the relief line and specifics at that time, I guess, around the Scarborough extension. So, again, I can't stress enough. We really are at a bit of a loss in terms of the kinds of details that we would want to know in order to assess, the time, the cost, and the quality of these decisions they're proposing.
61 burning questions. These next ones might be for the TTC or transportation planning. or planning staff, we've identified the relief line as our top transit priority a number of times in this chamber. Why was that the case?
Through the chair, that was primarily in order to relieve crowding on Line 1 and also provide additional journey opportunities and additional ridership on the east side of downtown.
Does our proposed relief line address those challenges? Do we have a sense of the ridership numbers that we'd need to achieve in order for the relief line as we've proposed to accomplish that?
Through the chair, the initial phase of the relief line from Pape Station to Osgood Station made a start towards delivering relief along Line 1, but does need to be paired up with Phase 2, which would extend it farther north.
What about the Ontario relief line? Would that accomplish these goals that we've identified?
We don't know enough right now about the technology that they are proposing. In particular, we don't know the capacity of the line that they are proposing.
Okay. The city's relief line plan has gone through the TPAP process. Approximately how long did that take for us to get there? Big announcement in the fall.
Through the Speaker, that took probably about 3 to 4 years to get through all the background work and get the TPAP approved.
And if you had to, I know we may not have the answer today, but thinking about this, if we were expanding north and having the scope change that has been proposed here, is it reasonable to assume that there might be another TPAP required if we were crossing the Don Valley maybe 2 times and extending north? Would that be typical?
Through the Speaker, there would certainly need to be a TPAP done for the extensions north and west on what we're doing. In terms of what would be required on the line that we've already planned, that is not clear yet until we know more from the province.
Do you have a sense of where we might put, and that I know this isn't necessarily your problem to figure out today, but do you have a sense of where we might put a maintenance facility for some new sort of vehicle type or vehicle track if it wasn't at Greenwood?
Through the chair, no. Our work was assuming that we would be running subway trains that would tie into our existing Greenwood yard. We do not have any information about where an alternative facility could be located.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Cole, you've got your name in the wrong spot. Councillor Matlow.
Is it, through you, Madam Speaker, is it not true that planning experts have supported moving forward with an LRT network in Scarborough to provide more service to more people, to more places of higher education, more priority neighborhoods for less money than either, well, certainly a 3-stop subway plan, including our own chief planners?
Through the Speaker, the proposed Scarborough Transit Plan that we put forward to Council a couple of years ago included the LRT, but also included an extension of the subway, smart track, and some rapid transit along Sheppard.
But is it? I'm just saying candidly, is it not true though? Then we've had former chief planners, TTC CEOs, etc., who've said that from both a transit planning, from and also from an economic development perspective, that the LRT plan was preferable. Is that not true? That has been said in this room.
Through the Speaker, the Eglinton East LRT is a project that we strongly support and that would provide necessary transit in that area, and that would also open up opportunities for development. Yes.
So it's not, there are no dollars allocated or recommended for allocation now to fully build the Eglinton East LRT, the 17-stop LRT.
Through the Speaker, there is no budget for the full build. There is reference to a budget request in 2020 for the next phase of design work.
And that if there are delays in building a subway, that could leave people in Scarborough on the bus, couldn't it? In between the RT being dismantled and any new order of transit being built.
So through the Speaker, if the Eglinton East LRT is not built, that would certainly leave a bus service.
I'm talking about the 7-stop as well.
And so then in terms of the subway, depending on how long that would take to build, there may be some challenges in SRT extension.
And the 7-stop was projected to be, it would take between 5 years to build. So that would actually be built quicker and be able to provide rapid transit sooner to Scarborough residents. Now, within the same funding envelope, we could build both the 7-stop LRT to replace the RT and the 17-stop crosstown extension east to U of T Scarborough. Why are there not recommendations to do the best thing for Scarborough residents in front of us today, rather than conditionally endorse Doug Ford's transit press conference?
Through the Speaker, we do not have an updated cost estimate on the LRT option for getting to Scarborough Centre. That has not been...
Are you saying we've got less information about the LRT option than we do about Doug Ford's scheme? Is that serious? You know what I'm saying. So we have recommendations in front of us, perhaps the city manager or to you, to conditionally endorse a plan that was done in a press conference that nobody here knew any details about, that we haven't asked any of these technical questions about, to allocate billions of dollars to, and yet we know that there are preferable plans that would spend less money, provide more service, and actually change people's lives. Why aren't those recommendations on the floor in front of us?
So as identified in our report to the executive, we had recommended 4 projects for PTIF funding. And what you have in front of you in the supplementary are 2 of those projects. And the province of Ontario has identified an interest in those projects. And so what we're doing simply is to better understand those projects, assess their validity, and come back here and present that information to Council to make an informed decision.
Do you understand how a reasonable person could read this language, and an unreasonable person who I'll refer to in a moment? But a reasonable person could read this language to endorse the following provincial priorities that was announced in a press conference without any substantive detail for the public or Council, where we were announced that we would fund before we even in so-called partnership contributed, that it says only to subject to the completion of the assessment rather than agreement, that we would be allocating most, if not all, the funds that we have allocated to these projects. Do you not see how a reasonable person would read this?
Mallow, your last question, and you're not even asking a question. Councillor Matlow, you're out of order. Councillor Matlow, you're okay. You don't have to answer that question. Councillor Fletcher, you're next.
Do I not get an answer?
No.
I don't get an answer.
No, you don't, because you weren't asking a question. You were just bullying the city manager.
No,
Councillor Fletcher.
Point of privilege, Madam Speaker.
Point of privilege?
Madam Speaker.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, earlier, with all due respect, the city manager answered Councillor Cressy's question that this is not an endorsement. The language, though, he either wrote it or signed it, but either way, it's got his name on it. And the language clearly states that we are endorsing simply subject to the completion of assessment, not agreement, not that it makes sense or anything, that a reasonable person or an unreasonable person like the Premier might infer that this is an endorsement.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. The city manager did answer that question to a number of members. He did. No, you're not. Councillor Fletcher, do you have questions? Well, no. Councillor Fletcher. Question.
Thank you. Do you have any idea how many trains that you would require for the current downtown relief line plan? South, we'll call it relief line south. New trains or would be put in service on that line?
Through the chair, the assumption was approximately 10 trains.
10
to run the line, yes.
10 trains to run the line that would be parked at Greenwood without any problem.
Our plan for the relief line between Pape and Osgood was that overnight the trains would be stabled along the line, as we have done on line 4 Shepherd for many years, but that they would go back to Greenwood when they need to for repairs and inspections.
So 10. Could I then suggest that the provincial plan would have 10, 10, and 10, or would they require more trains in order to run that Ontario line?
Again, we don't know the details of their proposed line.
I understand.
Presumably would require more trains if the line is
15
longer.
kilometers, so there would be more trains. And so a yard for 30 trains would be approximately how many acres?
We don't have that information.
Well, if there was 30 subway trains, how big of a yard would you require? And I'll go to my next question so somebody can figure those acres out. And my next question, unless you have it right away.
Oh, the very rough estimate is about 40 acres for a subway yard of that size.
40 acres for a subway yard for 10 trains?
No, for a larger number of trains to serve a longer line.
Okay. I'm just not going to go there. The environmental assessment, the TPAP, there is currently, how long did that environmental assessment take for the relief line branch? I'll call it phase 1.
Through the Speaker, we undertook that over a period of 3 to 4 years by the time it was completed and approved.
And that's all the technical pieces. And the environmental assessment for the Line 2 extension, has that been completed?
Through the Speaker, yes, that was completed a number of years ago, I think.
And that took about, what, 3 or 4 years?
That was, I think, a shorter process.
Shorter process. And so then, I guess I'm just going to ask about the environmental assessments, because would it be possible to just have a project with, such as changing the south section of the relief line and adding 2 new pieces on, without, number 1, reviewing at least the current environmental assessment we have for the relief line south, and doing 2 new ones for each of the other segments?
Through the Speaker, we may need to review the TPAP approved for the relief line south,
right,
depending on what we learn from the province about
correct,
their ideas.
Now, let's talk about the other 2 segments, north, yes, of the Danforth and west of Yonge. Those would be 2 brand new environmental assessments. They have not been undertaken yet.
That is correct. We have started technical work with Metrolinx on the north.
Have you initiated here any environmental assessments north of the Danforth?
Through the Speaker, no, we have not.
Okay, so there's no environmental assessment underway, even for the north, and there's the other section is brand new. There's nothing there. So we'd anticipate what? If it was fast-tracked, is there some way to fast-track that and have that as a, let's say, a 3-year environmental assessment, or not? Especially, yes, 3 years.
Through the Speaker, you could expedite it through resources put into the process. Yes.
To bring it down to
well, at the north, I think, would probably take less time because we have done some initial work.
Have you gone over the bridge? Have you gone over the valley, the 500 meters?
Through the
north
I mean,
one?
have I crossed the bridge personally?
No. I know you've crossed the bridge personally. I'm talking about in your preliminary technical work, have you in any way, shape, or form contemplated crossing the 500-meter Don Valley at Laird?
Through the Speaker, yes, that is one of the optional routes that is being considered for the northern extension.
And how hard is that to get across that valley?
Well, through the Speaker, it would be possible to cross that valley. That would be, we saw that as a viable option as we were identifying potential routes to examine.
And were you going on the bridge or below the river?
Through the Speaker, that would not be below the river. That would be incredibly deep. We anticipate that it would be
somewhere going above the...
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wish to unpack some of the discussion that the city manager and the rest of our little party will have when they go. I want to unpack the term roles and responsibilities in the context of the past changes that we've had so far. Up until now, the big piece between going from Transit City then to some plans under Mayor Ford's term, then some modifications here, the big thing has always been who's the leader of the project. We all play a role. Certainly we all play a funding role, but one of the conditions was once we figure out who has the leadership of the project, is it a Metrolinx or a TTC project, one of the things that the province has always been firm on is that's yours, City of Toronto and TTC, and therefore all contract and budget overages to complete the project are now your responsibility. Has that been discussed?
Through the chair, Speaker, sorry, no, not to our satisfaction. This is really why we got to get into what their expectations are with the 4 projects that they've identified. So we hope that there's some room for discussion around that as to who is the most practical to lead on which project.
Right, but the budget and contract overages, that hasn't been discussed to your satisfaction or hasn't been discussed at all?
Has not been discussed at all, through the chair.
So would you be surprised to hear that in the past, when we were saying, thank you very much, we want to do something different, province and Metrolinx, the condition has always been, okay, here's our funding, it's a flat amount, you can go ahead and execute as your project, City of Toronto, but we are done. At the end of this $1.8 billion, all the rest is your responsibility. Any contract or budget overage of any kind is on you. And here in this council chamber, former councillor, now Premier Ford, would you be surprised to hear he was always just fine with that? He thought that was an excellent idea. Would you be surprised to learn that?
Well, I don't know through the Speaker whether I'd say I'm surprised, but I mean, all I can say to you is I think we outlined in recommendation 1 of the supplemental the kinds of issues that we want to take up with them and to try and get as concrete an understanding of how it is that we're going to move these projects forward, subject to the assessment that we need to do. So,
right. And would it be fair to assume that if there is something that we have chosen as a priority, the smart track stations, in my part of the universe, the smart track station being just a little bit east of us at Shepherd and Kennedy, that is relief. People in my neighborhood at Shepherd and Victoria Park, why would you go over to Yonge Street if I can go jump on that train and be at Union Station? So they're very much looking forward to that. That's relief. But if we don't see it in their plan, should we assume if that's going to proceed, that we will take leadership to get that done? That will become our responsibility.
Through the Speaker, as you're aware, I think it was in December of 2018 that the stations themselves, that the Metrolinx is announced that they would take them to market to see whether or not there'd be an interest in private investment in those. So we've not heard back on them. We have certainly talked about our priorities as they relate to PTIF to see whether or not the province would support us making the critical investments in Smart Track, as some of the money from PTIF is earmarked for Smart Track stations. So we're hoping that we can get something in writing from them supporting us in terms of that priority.
Okay. So would you see a motion right now defining that responsibility? If you have leadership of it, you're responsible for the overages. Would that be problematic, or should we wait till you report back to us on how these initial conversations went, but then nail down that responsibility project by project?
Through the Speaker, I like your second suggestion.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. Questions for TTC to start with. What type of fare structure is the province proposing for the Ontario line?
Through the chair, we do not know the answer to that question. Our work on the relief line has assumed that it would be part of our fare system.
So is the assumption that their fare system would be different than our fare system, or do we not know yet?
Through the chair, we do not know the answer to that question.
Have they, I'm trying to think where I got that notion from. Have they talked about it being different?
That sort of issue is exactly the sort of thing that will be discussed between the city, the TTC, and the province.
Okay, so we don't know yet. If it is not compatible would that have an impact on ridership?
Through the chair, absolutely yes. Whether it's part of the fare system or not, TTC fare system or not, would have a very direct impact on the ridership on the line.
Right. So, and if obviously if it had an impact on the number of riders, it would have an impact on the ability to divert people from line 1.
That is correct.
Right. So then I guess question of the city manager, the issue of the fare structure and the compatibility, how that might affect ridership and how that might in turn affect the ability of the relief line / Ontario line to divert traffic off line 1. Is that an important part of what you will be discussing or negotiating?
Through the speaker, yes. I believe that, I mean, that's got to be part of the entirety of not just design and you know, station specifics or anything like that. I think the fare structure would be just as important in terms of who will use the line.
And I assume that would be, then following logically from that, that would be a component of our concern about whether whether it's feasible or desirable to extend line 1 north when we don't know that we've done sufficient measures to divert people off of that line.
So again, I think through the speaker, I think those kinds of questions are obviously important. So we're early days to understand what the true effect of this Ontario line is. It could result in something that we would support, but at this point, we don't have those kinds of answers.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you to the city manager, Madam Chair. The first question is, when did you first hear of the $1.1 billion cut to the City of Toronto vis-a-vis the promised gas tax money?
Through the speaker, when you heard it.
So here we are negotiating in good faith with the province. We're telling them that our number one priority is the state of good repair. Then all of a sudden they announce a $1.1 billion cut to that. Did you bring that to Mr. Lindsay, the mysterious Mr. Lindsay, who's nobody ever seen? Did you say, Mr. Lindsay, I thought we were bargaining in good faith. I read in the paper you've cut our most important priority, our state of good repair, by 1.1. What did Mr. Lindsay say?
So through the speaker, with all due respect, Mr. Lindsay is not an elected official, so he didn't make the cut. And in terms of did we raise this at the table, we certainly talked about our concerns about the state of good repair, how we have to address condition issues, and that certainly the impact of the gas tax would be in effect taking us in the wrong direction. But in fairness to Mr. Lindsay, I mean, he did not make that decision.
No, he didn't make the decision, but you're bargaining at the table with him. He's the point man for the Premier on this plan. And you didn't ask Mr. Lindsay, how could this be in good faith if in the middle of these negotiations we get blindsided by a $1.1 billion cut? What, did you raise that with Mr. Lindsay?
Through the speaker, we certainly did. We certainly mentioned that this is taking us in the wrong direction. And that, you know, again, one of the priorities that we should all collectively have at the table is addressing, as I think our CEO of the TTC has indicated, that we first things to take care of is the condition of the system. And so obviously a withdrawal of over $1 billion is moving us in the wrong direction.
So what was his response to the $1.1 billion? What did he say, too bad, tough?
No, our dialogue isn't of that nature. I mean, he did not in that kind of spiteful way.
He wasn't fazed by the $1.1 billion and said, sorry, they did that.
I I wouldn't have expected him to apologize, to be honest. What I would expect him to do is to honor what our table is trying to address, and that is addressing both the existing subway system that they've expressed an interest in talking to us about, as well as the expansion of that system. So I expect that this will continue to be our discussion.
But does the $1.1 billion cut honor the whole, let's say, tenure of the discussions? Does it honor that, you know, honest, face-to-face, business-like dialogue? Does it honor that?
Through the Speaker, again, it's a step in the wrong direction as far as we're concerned. I don't believe we expected that we'd be losing money at the table, but I don't think this conversation's over.
The next question is, in your report on page 14, it talks about the appointment of these mysterious inspectors that the province is going to send to the TTC properties. It's going to make sure that you're complying, the TTC is complying with all these provisions, requirements. They're going to take photographs, conducting tests, requiring production of records, observing activities of employees, officers, and agents. And should the city or the TTC, in the opinion of the Minister of Transportation, not comply, they're going to take you to court, Superior Court of Justice, for an order directing the City of Toronto. Is this part of, you know, good faith bargaining that they're going to change? They changed the Public Transportation Act to basically send in these inspectors to do whatever they want on TTC property. I mean, did you mention that was sort of like a bit heavy-handed?
Through the Speaker, I mean, our conversation has been a willingness to share information with them that would help them understand the state of good repair. So this is an extra step, maybe an extraordinary step. I don't know if it's entirely necessary in order for us to share with them the information they're looking for. But at the end of the day, they are going to have to satisfy themselves as to the state of good repair that system is in.
No, that was it. You're finished. Thank you. Councillor Lai.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the City Manager, your 61 preliminary questions that in your report, are you submitting these questions in writing to the province?
Through the Speaker, we already have.
You already have?
Yeah.
Thank you. And on page 3 of 4, question number 46, and it says, what assumptions have been made related to extending the life of Line 3 and supplementary bus services? Do you think this language here is strong enough to make sure that assurance been made to the residents in Scarborough that depends on the Scarborough RT?
Through the Speaker, I mean, I think as we stress, these are preliminary questions, so we fully expect that there will be follow-up questions depending on how they respond to that initial question. So we have no difficulty making it abundantly clear the importance of that line to the citizens of this community, in particular in the Scarborough area. So if there's something you wish to amend that would further make the point, we'd be more than happy to communicate that.
Yes, I'd like to request that you ask a question of what assurances will there be to the residents of Scarborough RT? That using the RT now, because it's going to be given that there's going to be a gap between the Scarborough subway being completed.
Certainly, through the Speaker, we can certainly take that as direction and follow up for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, thank you very much. So the TTC's the city's plans and the TTC's transit planning never really contemplated for a subway line to go up to Eglinton and Don Mills, did it?
Through the Speaker, we have been working about looking at Relief Line North options that would take it to Eglinton and perhaps up to Shepherd as well.
Right, but you really never had a date of completion. There was never really any funding behind it, was there?
Through the Speaker, no, this has all been in the initial planning phases.
Sure. And but the Ontario line goes, that actually is a plan that the provincial government is planning to move forward with, and that does bring a subway up to Eglinton and Don Mills Road, does it not?
Through the Speaker, that is what the budget and the announcements have said.
Yes. So that's a good thing, yes?
We would certainly support taking the line up to Eglinton, but beyond as well is very important in order to provide the kind of service and relief to Line 1 that we need.
And unlike the city or the TTC's planning, they have actually a date that when they'd like to get that completed by, do they not?
Through the Speaker, we also have a date that we have talked about in terms of when we would like to see Relief Line North. We have not yet seen the details of any analysis that the province has done on this.
And what's your date?
We have talked about the need for that shortly after the opening of the Yonge subway extension, so in the 2031 range.
You'll have it up to Eglinton and Don Mills Road?
Through the Speaker, this has been how we have framed the Relief Line North extension up to Shepherd, that section would be needed.
Oh, up to Shepherd? You're going to have it all the way up to Shepherd by 2031? Because this is the first time I've heard of that.
No, through the Speaker, that was in the report that we brought to Council when we talked about the Relief Line North and the Yonge subway extension a couple of years ago, that work needed to proceed, and we are working with Metrolinx on that work, on that project.
So you were planning on having the Relief Line built to the Bloor Line by what year?
Through the Speaker, the timeline for Relief Line South up to Pape Station is 2029.
And you were going to have the North Line completed by 2031? In 2 years?
Through the Speaker, we were still undertaking the additional analysis, and we were talking about when we anticipated the need for that line based on our understanding of demand on Line 1 and relief that will be required.
So is it fair to say that the Ontario line is a firmer commitment than that we were planning on doing?
Through the Speaker, I have no basis for making that judgment.
Oh, I see. But it would be a benefit to have a subway line at Flemington and Thorncliffe and give those communities a way to get downtown, a way to get to work.
Through the Speaker, yes, we have acknowledged that in our work on Relief Line North that those would be important communities to serve, and that there would be a benefit in taking this line to Eglinton and beyond.
And having that hub would help serve all those, let's say, 9,000 new units that are being built in the Don Mills Eglinton area.
Through the Speaker, yes, that would be a benefit for the Don Mills development.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. On page 3, it says staff are recommending continuing with the council-approved plan for a one-stop Line 2 East extension. And on page 7, it says staff are recommending the TTC will assess market capability and develop a work plan to start planning and design for 2 additional subway stations. Are we working on a one-stop line or on a 3-stop line? And if the province is taking it over, why are we doing any work at all? There's 2 questions.
Through the Speaker, we're actually designing the one-stop at this point in time, but we're asking Council today to give us the authority to make an assessment of the 3-stop subway. That's part of the recommendation.
I'm sorry, so you're continuing to work on the 1 subway line?
Yes.
And page 7 says you're going to start working on the 3 subway line, 3-stop subway.
We're going to make an assessment of what's required to do to change to a 3-stop.
Okay, because it says this, you're going to start planning and designing for 2 additional subway stations. So I'm confused.
No, we're not planning and designing. We're making an assessment of what has to be done to do that.
Okay. So my other question is, if we know the province is taking this all over, why are we pouring millions of more dollars into it? Why don't we let them foot the bill?
Certainly, if I can, through the speaker, if you go back to, I think, our first recommendation, we do point out that if there are any costs that we're incurring as a result of this transition, assuming for a moment that that in fact occurs, we'll be seeking reimbursement for those costs or those aspects of the design that are no longer required. So we're trying to, I think, in short order, only do those things that we think will add value, short of just putting our pens down and waiting until we know specifically what it is that they're contemplating.
There's two items on our tax bill. Maybe this is for the CFO. There's something we started levying a number of years ago for Line 2 extension. We called it the Scarborough Subway back then. I guess it's on everyone's tax bill. And then we have an infrastructure fee as well. Do those funds go directly into reserve accounts for future transit needs, or?
Through the chair, yes, they do.
And are those reserve accounts in good standing? Are we using them currently to fund the projects we're discussing today, or are they for the future?
Through the chair, they are for the future. They have not yet been committed.
Okay. Through you to staff, I guess it's been a little over 3 years since we directed the chief planner at the time, the deputy city manager, and the chief executive officer of the Toronto Transit Commission to report back to council on the cost range and funding options for an environmental assessment for the Shepherd Line West. And I'm just wondering how that work is going.
Through the speaker, we, as I indicated to you in an email this week, Councillor, we will be undertaking further work related to a number of options and what would be required, a number of optional lines that Council has raised, and what would be required to advance the planning on those lines, including the extension of the Shepherd subway to the west.
Okay. Well, I'll certainly be taking another look at that email. Going back to May of 2013, we ranked a series of transit projects, Council did, to be the recipients of new revenue tools. The first one was the Downtown Relief Line, as it was called at the time. The second one, B, was the Scarborough subway line, and the third one was the Shepherd subway line as well. Now, new revenue tools, I guess, since this period, is certainly the infrastructure piece on the tax.
Councillor Pasternak, that was your last question.
Can I finish up?
Well, yes, but
okay, fair
you're
enough.
after 5.
So I'm just wondering how, in light of this ranking, and I realize you probably don't have the motion in front of you.
And make it short.
In light of the ranking and the new revenue tools that we've introduced in 2013, how much has been applied to the Shepherd subway?
Through the speaker, other than the Scarborough subway levy, which was a 1.6% levy implemented in 2013, and the city building fund levy, we have not had any additional revenue tools beyond those 2 items, and they're not specifically dedicated to the Shepherd line.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you. I'm just picking up on the questions regarding the sunk costs. So the Scarborough extension, so far we've invested about $182.5 million, and the relief line study has accumulated about approximately $15.4 million in sunk costs. That's correct?
Yes, that is correct, through the speaker.
And when council decided not to proceed with the Scarborough LRT in the previous 3 terms back, I believe that we lost about $85 million in sunk costs then. Is that correct?
Yes, in fact, there was an audit undertaken at the time, and the amount is $75 million.
$75 million. And I believe that the auditor, the Ontario Auditor General, actually wrote a pretty damning report specifically about the flipping and decision-making around transit planning and how it's not necessarily good for taxpayers, or it wasn't responsible to taxpayers.
So certainly there was some criticism by the Ontario AG with respect to transit planning generally, and the $75 million was noted as part of the cost to the taxpayers.
Yeah, thank you very much. So if we are not able to use the plans that we've already created underway, especially the big quantum for the Scarborough extension, we will not be able to recover that cost, or I know that we're going to be asking the province to recover that cost. The last time we did it to ourselves, so we couldn't recover the $75 million. But this time, somebody else is doing it to us. What are the likely chances of the province giving us back the $182 million in sunk costs, the $15 million, and the millions being spent every month in sunk costs? Because have they made any indication that they are going to absorb that responsibility?
Through the Speaker, I think the words would be they would consider it.
They would consider it. Does that give you confidence that we will see a check to recover that cost?
Not the confidence I'm sure members of council would want, but I'll take it as face value and continue to pursue the matter with them to see if they can give us an answer as black and white as possible as to what extent they will commit to compensating us for those kinds of costs. So we'll raise that immediately.
And so when will we know? Because I know that you're trying not to slow down the process. You've already got council directions. You're proceeding with the studies. This is very heavy engineering, very expensive work. When will we know? Because the sunk cost will just continue to rise month after month, especially if it's in the quantum of approximately $10 million per month. When do we stop? When do we know?
So our goal is, as I think I said earlier, there will be a technical meeting this week. I'll raise that particular question that you just mentioned, Councillor, about compensation. We're going to see if we can't understand what a schedule might look like to be able to answer the 61 questions we raised and be able to get back to you as quick as possible. I'm expecting I'll be in front of you in some manner in June. I think in a previous commitment we made, we were supposed to come back on a fairly regular basis. So I'll do everything I can to get answers to the questions, in particular the compensation question you just raised.
Okay, thank you. And with respect to the map that the Premier had unveiled a day before the budget launch, and then I guess in greater detail at the budget launch, $11.2 billion would be the provincial contribution. Approximately $17.3 would be left to the city and the federal government to negotiate. The PTIF dollars right now is sitting at $4.897 billion. Is the recommendation here that we, if everything goes according to the province's plans, that we would be on the hook for $12.403 billion?
Through the Speaker, that's not my understanding.
That's okay. So that's never going to happen.
Well, I don't ever. It's not the expectation of any of us that we would be expected to pay that. And I would add that in terms of other parties that would be contributing, there is an expectation that York Region, as well as I would expect possibly Mississauga, as well as the airport, would in some way, shape, or form contribute to the cost of these expansions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. We had given you the opportunity to have different revenue tools to raise funds in order to explore subways, streetcars, and everything else through additional tax that we had given you. How much money have we collected on that?
Through the Speaker, the only additional revenue tool that Council's actually approved is the City Building Fund, which is a dedicated property tax levy intended to fund transit as well as affordable housing.
How much money?
And we raise, so it's to be phased in over a period of 5 years, at a 0.5% increment. And in the fullness of time, it will raise roughly $75 million annually.
At $75 million, that's about $3 million award. And this was supposed to do environmental studies, environmental assessments, and different other studies for different parts of the of Toronto in order to see what transit we can put in there. Correct?
The purpose of that levy is to fund studies as well as actual infrastructure related to transit and affordable housing.
Through the speaker to staff, how many times have we requested a report on Shepherd Subway, east or west, or an environmental assessment to be done or study to come back to us? 3, 4, 5?
Through the speaker, that request has come several times.
Okay. Have we done any work on that request?
Through the speaker, we are doing some work on the latest request about Shepherd East that you put forward to Council, looking at modeling the current or more recent growth demands and what that might mean for the line. But we also already have an approved EA along Shepherd for the LRT extension that Metrolinx has undertaken.
That was when? The Metrolinx LRT?
That was approved, that EA was approved several years back.
2010, 2009?
Sorry? 2010 around 2009, 2010. I don't know the exact
Since 2009, 2010, you agree with me that the dynamics and especially the buildings that are coming up in that area have changed?
Through the speaker, there has been some growth, but there was an expert panel that Council appointed to look at the very question again a number of years back that found that an LRT was still a reasonable way to serve that demand.
Then, since we're looking at a subway along Shepherd or some form of express mode, why, when I look at these, I only see the mention that the other projects in the Ontario proposal, it states on page 11, in about 5 lines, the province has also indicated in its comment on an eastern extension of line 4 and keeps going on the Shepherd. And yet, when we look at other places, there is lines that we're not proposing, and then we're diving into them, like on page 8 and other pages. Why is that discretion in that report?
Through the speaker, over the past several years, Council has approved a number of projects that we are undertaking analysis for the expansion of Toronto's transit network.
Okay, through the chair, where was our relief line supposed to stop? At Union Station, or was it supposed to be going on farther out west?
The first phase of the relief line south was to go from Pape Station at the Bloor line downtown to Queen and Osgood. The intention was always that there would at some point be an extension northbound as well as an extension to the west, but the first phase was the one that we are advancing right now.
So that's on page 6 of this report, correct? Line East Extension Network, if I'm not mistaken, or is it on page?
Through the speaker, the section of the supplementary report on the relief line is on page 8 of 15.
Okay, so on page 8 we do have the proposed Ontario line project, and it shows that we're going east. And I want to thank you for putting that detailed report, but our intention was that we're going to stop at Queen, and at Union Station, and some point in time in the not too distant future we're going to have an extension.
Through the speaker, we were never intending to go to Union Station. The line that was approved was always along Queen Street and would go to Osgood Station.
And that was where it was going to stop?
That was where we were planning till now, with the intention that there would be a western extension in the future.
Right, but what I'm saying is in our report, we do look at both lines. And when it comes to Shepherd on page 11, we don't have that detailed analysis. Maybe next time we can have that. Thank you.
That was your last question. Councillor Layton. Councillor Layton?
Aye.
Councillor Layton.
Mike Layton. Mike Layton. Councillor Grimes.
Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll run interference for Councillor Layton until we find him. My questions are the waterfront transit network. What year is the waterfront West supposed to be happening? I know we've done EA's underway. What year is that supposed to be happening now?
So through the speaker, the waterfront transit network is a series of projects spread out over the next 10 plus years, and what we want to see move ahead first is the Union Station to Queens Quay and East Bayfront piece, a chunk of line from Exhibition to Dufferin Gate, and then we're looking at some other improvements in the Park Lawn, Humber Bay Shores area.
Closing the gap. Closing the gap to the western.
Closing the gap is
from St. Joe's Hospital to Dufferin. There's talk on how we're going to close that gap.
Yes.
Have that come up in any of the talks with the province so far?
Through the speaker, we have certainly raised with the province in our technical briefing the work that we have been doing on waterfront LRT. It has not shown in any of the provincial plans to date.
It wasn't shown, but with the the plans on bringing transit to Ontario Place, would that not fit nicely in with what we're doing on the waterfront?
Through the speaker, that may be. We need to understand a little bit more about what they're proposing for that extension to Ontario Place and how it relates to what we were thinking in the waterfront project.
But they're aware of the waterfront plan?
They are aware of the waterfront plan, yes.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of the question. Oh, Councillor Thompson?
I just put my name up because I'm hoping that Councillor Layton will come, but I just asked a couple of questions of the city manager. Mr. City Manager, could you just help us or help me to understand how things are progressing at the table? Are you finding that the discussion is one in which there's a strong partnership relationship and that you're able to bring the concerns of council to the table and they are being addressed in ways that they can be, or is there a mechanism to get back to you with additional information as per the requests?
So the Speaker, the nature of the table is very professional, as you would hope and expect. I would say there's evidence of that respect in how the terms of reference have evolved. We certainly started in a very narrow position, but they have certainly understood the concerns that we have as the City of Toronto, and so the terms of reference, I think, have evolved accordingly. We look forward, quite frankly, to be able to sit down with them and understand in specific terms what their proposals entail for the reasons that we've outlined in this report. So I don't expect that will change. I think we'll continue to serve our respective decision makers in the manner which you would hope us to do. So, there's always going to be challenges, I think, at a table that, is focused on something as important as this. But I have no indication of any meeting I've attended where, the dialogue hasn't been professional and constructive.
Right. So the discussions at the table and the proposals and the number of questions that you're looking, I think it was 61 questions that you're seeking to ask, and I guess the additional question from Councillor Lai in terms of clarification. So you go through all of those and you get some answers that you like, some that we don't like. The province has an objective in terms of the uploading June. That's in a couple of months. Do you think reasonably, as part of this process of the table, that we'll be able to address these issues in time? Do you think that there'll probably be, or perhaps is there a need for an extension? Have you looked at that, perhaps, in order to facilitate our needs?
So, like I say, I've already issued the letter to Michael Lindsay and Deputy Minister of Transportation, and so they got our 61 questions. I would expect when we see them later this week, we would get a sense of the speed in which they'll be able to address those questions. So I'm interested in getting some sense of timing, because I know this council is expecting to know what the results are. So again, whether or not they will 100% satisfy us is maybe a different question. But we certainly have put them in front of them, and we expect to get some response as quick as possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Speaker. Mike, you're
Thank you. That's the last Councillor Layton.
That is
Make
Mike
it good.
sticking together, I tell you. Thank you very much, Councillor Thompson. I'm looking at this graphic on page, I think it's 29 of the original report that goes through the stage gates and what projects are where. You know what I'm referring to? I just want to get an idea of the length of time it takes us to move through these stage gates. So first, on the initiation and development stage gate, what's the time frame? I know you're not going to be able to say it's 190 days or 365 days, but what are we looking at? Is it years? Is it 1 year, 2 year? The initiation and development, stages 1 and 2.
Through the speaker, I mean, again, it depends on the complexity of the individual project, but 1 to 2 years is probably a reasonable.
And the preliminary design and engineering, again, understanding smaller, easier projects. LRTs probably move a little faster than some of the more the deeper subway construction. What's the time frame for that preliminary design and engineering stage?
Again, that could be 1 or 2 years.
1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
And just on the procurement and construction, well, that could be a decade, correct? Depending on the complexity of the project.
Through the speaker, that's correct. It could be as long as that.
Could be 3 weeks, like on King Street, or a decade, or never. Can we go through some of the projects? So at the later stage gates, 5 and 6, Eglinton Crossdown, nearing completion, Finch LRT completion in 2023, correct?
Through the speaker, that is correct.
So that would put roughly the initiation and development phase being 4 years ago for Eglinton and Finch, right? Not 4 years ago, sorry, because they're nearing construction.
Roughly, so it would have been longer ago than that, and we probably gave you very ambitious timelines as we were responding just now.
Sure. So the Line 2 East extension that we've been preparing for, gone through the preliminary design and engineering, that's at the gate around the funding decision that would move into the procurement, correct?
Through the speaker, that's where we are on that.
That's where we are, as on the smart track stations, right?
Yes.
So any changes in scope would set us back by 1 of the stage gates, maybe 2, depending on whether we were going back to the drawing board on the initiation and development or just on the preliminary engineering design.
Through the speaker, that is correct, depending on what the change is.
So the relief line south is in that stage gate 3 to 4, and it's nearing completion of that stage gate that then would move on to the next one. The waterfront exhibition Dufferin is again in that same space as is the Yonge Street extension north. Are those correct?
Through the speaker, that is correct. Well, we're coming to the recommendations on those over the next number of months.
For funding and procurement.
Yes.
So the relief line south, given the new terrain we're on, this new proposal, that would move back to the initiation and development stage?
Through the speaker, I don't think we can make that judgment yet until we know exactly what it is that the province is proposing.
New technology, new alignment. Like we're at the initiation and development phase. To be fair, that's.
Through the speaker, they have talked about reusing the alignment that we have for Relief Line South, but there may be changes. The technology may change some of the assumptions and aspects of the design that we have been working on.
So the waterfront exhibition in Dufferin was supposed to get to the end of this stage gate soon. What would happen with that if all of our PTIF funding and essentially all of our funding for state of good repair was directed to other projects? Would that continue?
Through the speaker, that piece would continue. We, in our report, propose bringing that through the 2020 budget process. It's a relatively small-scale project that would have a significant operational impact for the TTC.
So that piece also was hoping to lead for the extension of the waterfront line that's in stage gate 1 and 2. Would there be any money left to build that component?
So through the speaker on we're proposing on the Queens Quay to Union Station and East Bayfront piece is some funding in the 2020 budget to take it into the preliminary design and engineering phase.
But would there be any funding in our capital limit or in our PTIF envelope?
Through the speaker, there is nothing in the PTIF envelope, and nor were we looking for full funding for that at this point.
But there'll be no money available through our capital funding or from existing programs from the federal government to fund any portion of that. To actually do the funding of.
Okay, thank you. That was your last question.
Through the Speaker, I can't predict what Council's decisions may be on that.
Okay, thank you. That's it for the questions. We'll go to the speakers. Mayor Tory.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I have two motions, and maybe we could put the first one up, Motion A, and I'll try and summarize. People will obviously have a chance to read these, but I think Motion A, and I, by the way, move the staff recommendations contained in the supplementary report as well. But Motion A, I think, is probably provides for the most complete assessment by our professional public servants as you could possibly have, and our TTC transit experts on the subject of the provincial proposals. And of course, the results of that are to be reported back here to Council. And then, subject to that report coming back here, we would then consider allocating dollars out of the federal allocation to the Ontario line after we've seen the city manager's report. And we've changed some of the language here, as you can see, to make that perfectly clear. But it was always clear to any reasonable person that that was the intent. Just to refer, for example, to page 9 of the supplementary report put in front of us today. This supplementary report recommends the city consider redirecting the $3.151 billion in PTIF $2 to the proposed Ontario line, subject to the outcome of further analysis on the commercial and technical merits of the project and its effect on the overall transit network to the satisfaction of City Council. So this was the language that was always in the report, notwithstanding the attempts of some to suggest that that wasn't the case. But we'll make it perfectly clear in these motions. And so I think that's what this Motion A, and then Motion B, Speaker, really deals with what I call the rest of the story, the parts that were left out of the provincial proposals last week. What about the Scarborough East, Eglinton East LRT? What about the waterfront? What about state of good repair? What about the issues that are related to the possibilities for development at transit sites, and who will oversee those, and what everybody's role will be in those, and what prospects, for example, exist to be dealing with the question before us of affordable housing. And so what you get out of these motions and the recommendations made by the city manager in his supplementary report, Speaker, is first, I think, as thorough an assessment and expression of our approved priorities that as you could have, both being taken to the provincial table for discussion, as we just heard the city manager discussing, and a report back to us of the results and analysis of that assessment that has been done on the merits or the demerits of these provincial proposals, on which we have fairly scanty information, frankly. I think we all know that. I think they know that too. I think, secondly, we get out of this the affirmation of the fact that this council has an approved transit plan. If you go and look at the report that passed through the Executive Committee, if you look at the supplementary report put forward by the city manager today and these motions, and I think if we get the kind of solid affirmation I believe we will get from this council to say, we have a transit plan. We always did, and we still do. And there's been a lot of work done on it, as is catalogued very well in these reports, and that we are not unprepared to look at other people's ideas, as I think is important for us to do, because if we're going to be involved in a genuine two-way dialogue, you can't say you're not going to at least look at and thoroughly assess the other guy's ideas, but that we want to reaffirm on the record that we have a plan. And furthermore, it says that we're going to continue within reason to work on that plan, because I think we've all agreed over time that delay is our greatest enemy. And so if we have a plan that has been approved many times here, with the exception of people who want to keep themselves in a kind of a time warp spin cycle and go over and over these things again, we've had a plan that's been approved and that we are saying that we still do, and we're going to keep working on it within reason while we get this report back, hopefully not too long in the taking because of the monthly cost that is outlined in the city manager's report. And so I really do hope that we will send that positive affirmation today. We will endorse the city manager going to the table, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. I trust him. I, as the mayor and as one member of this council, trust him going to the table, accompanied by the CEO of the TTC and by one of our most senior financial officials, to have those discussions and put those questions and express those concerns and come back here with an assessment of what they learned when they were at that table. I trust them to do that. I think they're as good people as we could possibly get to do that. And I think that we have to have a willingness on our part to have a continued good faith dialogue, and it has to be good faith on both sides, to go there and to discuss all these matters and assess all these different proposals that have been brought forward. But I think it is also fair to say at this stage that the onus must rest on the province to provide those answers, not just to the 66 questions, but to 6,600 questions, if not more, because they were the ones that most recently, in the presence of a plan that we've approved and are proceeding with at this council, put forward different ideas. And so the onus now rests on them, in my submission, to answer the questions about why their route to be taken is better for the people of Toronto. Not for us, and not for anybody's particular plan, better for the people of Toronto. And so I hope people will endorse these motions and will send that positive affirmation, strong positive affirmation from us that we have a plan, but we are willing in good faith to go and assess these things properly with the proper detail and to come back here and consider the results of that assessment and make further decisions after that. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. We do have a question for you, Councillor Matlow.
Madam Speaker. Mr. Mayor, a few years ago, you acknowledged that the three-stop subway plan was not good for Toronto and not good for Scarborough. In fact, I believe it was your words when you said, to paraphrase, that it was back of a napkin planning. So why would you argue that we should be considering to endorse a plan that you yourself, along with every expert that I've ever heard from, has said that it is not a good plan to move forward with?
Again, Madam Speaker, through you, you've come up with these words that sort of suggest I've said, different things. What I've just finished saying in the last, sorry, I didn't interrupt you. What I've just finished saying in the last 5 minutes when I was given time to speak is that we should do a thorough assessment. It'll be done by our professional public servants to look at the province's ideas, because I don't believe that it is in good faith for us to go to a table where we're having a negotiation with them with quite a broad set of terms of reference and to just say, well, we're not even going to talk about your ideas. And I'm actually in no position, because we don't have enough detail on most of what's in the provincial proposals, to be able to make an assessment, a considered assessment, of whether they're better or worse or the same. So that's why we're asking our public servants, and that's what this report always said, notwithstanding suggestions made by people to the contrary, that we're going to have that assessment made. It's going to come back here, and then we have to be satisfied that it's either better or worse or something in between, and we'll make a judgment at that time.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I didn't just pick words. I was using your words, and you seem to agree that a three-stop subway plan was not a good scheme. That in fact you led council to reject it in favor of your one-stop plan. So what I don't understand is if you've led council to sink funds, tax dollars, into a plan that you've endorsed, you've gone out and spoken in favor of it numerous times, you've rallied for it, you've championed it, you've fought for it, you have said that you believe in it. Why would you and also every expert that we've heard from has agreed that the three-stop plan is not a good plan.
I'm sure there's a question coming somewhere, Madam Speaker.
These are your words. This is what you told us.
Was there a question?
And the question is?
And the question is, again, you didn't answer my initial question. Why would you submit to council and to the public that we should be considering endorsing a plan that you yourself have actually lobbied against?
May I make it clear, Madam Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, that what we've just finished talking about again is that we should, in good faith, go and assess what has been put forward here by the Premier and the Government of Ontario. I haven't said anything about endorsing it. I've specifically said we want to assess it and get a professional report. Evidence-based, I think, is the expression we often hear around here from our professional public servants about the merits and demerits of that plan. But I will tell you, because I've been very, very clear and very consistent, as you have been, in doing everything you possibly can to oppose and slow down and change and redecide, the Scarborough subway that goes to Scarborough Town Centre. I've been absolutely 100% consistent on that, and I stand here today saying, as I just did, we have an affirmed transit plan in this city which includes a one-stop at the Scarborough Town Centre, which I think is going to be a mecca for development and for jobs in Scarborough, and I'd proceed with it tomorrow, and we will continue with the work on it tomorrow because we're achingly close to being able to start construction of that. It's actually you that's had a problem with that, through you, Madam Speaker, but we're going to proceed with that. But we owe it, I think, if we're going to be in good faith discussions, to look at the merits and demerits through the eyes of professional public servants, not politicians with their own, with their own predispositions about what they may think about these projects. They're going to look at that, and they'll come back and tell us what the merits and demerits are, and I'm very satisfied with that.
Do you understand, though, that over years, not only was that reviewed and examined by planners, by experts, but in fact what we know authoritatively already is that this change not could but will end up in delays for providing rapid transit to Scarborough residents, more time left on the bus for people who already have a 2-hour commute in the morning and in the afternoon rush hours. What is your position on, I mean, do you support a 3-stop subway?
So that we're clear, Madam Speaker, again, I support the City Council approved transit plan that we have in place at the moment and proceeding as we were well along doing. We were making more progress and actually proceeding with that subway than ever before. And same on the relief line, by the way. And several members of council, including the councillor asking questions through you, Madam Deputy Speaker, were here long before I was and got nothing done on the relief line. So having said all that,
privilege.
Councillor Matlow, no more questions.
Well,
I'll hear your point of privilege, but you're done.
Well, Madam Speaker, if I can keep this gentleman from going into a total lather and just withdraw that, I'll withdraw those remarks.
I have not stated my point of
Madam
privilege.
Speaker. So if I can just finish answering.
And I'd
like to be able to articulate the point of privilege.
Let me finish answering.
Well, hold on. I have a point of privilege.
Mr. Merritt, there's no pause on a point of privilege.
Yeah.
I'll hear the point of privilege, but I will park that you have already offered to withdraw.
Thank you. I share many people's frustrations with the lack of progress of this council. But to suggest that, whether it be me or any other member of council here, was directly responsible for delaying the relief line is impugning their reputation, is an unfair characterization. It sounds politically motivated, but it's not an accurate representation. And I would like the mayor to withdraw that, if not apologize.
He did already.
Did you withdraw that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I accept that then.
Thank you. And that was your last question.
Yeah, and I'll just give the answer to it now. I will say that while nobody, I guess, consciously delayed the relief line, precious little had been done on it up until the time of after the 2014 election. But having said all that, when you ask me the question, am I in favor of delay? Of course I'm not in favor of delay, which is why I would proceed right now. And in fact, we're saying we are ready to proceed. We as a council, maybe with some exceptions who want to oppose these things, Madam Speaker, but we're ready to proceed. This is ready to go to construction tender at the end of this year, and we can move forward on that and other projects. So the relief line was making significant progress, and that would still be my preference. And now all we're saying is, since they've put some ideas on the table, that in good faith we should assess those through the eyes of our professional public servants and see what they tell us back, and we will then be in a position here as a council to make those decisions as to how to go forward.
Okay, thank you. One more question for you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Karagianis.
Thank you. Mayor, if we can put your motion back on, are you asking the city manager to go to the negotiating table or to go to the table and look at all the projects that they're putting forward? All the lines?
I think, Madam Speaker, through you, what we asked them to look at here was the projects that they put forward that altered or proposed to alter projects already included in our approved transit plan.
So what you're saying is all the lines. Would I be correct?
Well, what I'm saying is all the projects that were in our approved transit plan, in this case what we're really talking about is the Eglinton West LRT, the Bloor Danforth East subway extension, and the
Mr. Mayor, I heard you saying that
waterfront,
in your proposal...
Councillor, please allow the mayor to answer the question.
The motion that
the relief line. Sorry, there's three they fundamentally propose to change quite dramatically. Eglinton West by burying it, part of it. The relief line in the way we know to change it to the Ontario line, and the Bloor Danforth subway extension by making it 3 stops. So we asked our professional public servants to review those and get the detail we don't have at present with respect to those projects and all the changes that are proposed.
Mr. Mayor, my question is very simple. Are you asking the city manager in your motion that they look at all their projects? Yes or no?
Well, I tried to answer it in a way that was complete and honest, which is to say we were asking them specifically to examine, our staff to examine, the projects the province said they were going to significantly alter, which previously and currently form a part of our approved transit plan. Scarborough East subway extension, Relief Line, and Eglinton West LRT. We're asking them to come back, in particular on the first 2, and tell us what the merits or demerits and answers to the question about the technology and so on. With all the other projects that are mentioned in there, no, we haven't asked for that kind of a report.
I heard you say that Scarborough Centre was going to be a mecca of construction, and we needed to get that subway out there quickly.
Well, I'm so glad you asked me that, Madam Speaker, because it gives me another chance to say that I have myself talked to people, as have other members of council, that say there are going to be billions of dollars of development that are going to go into that area around the Scarborough Town Centre. There are going to be new places to work, new jobs, new residences, people able to walk to work and expand the Scarborough Town Centre. This is going to be the best news arising out of the construction of this subway when we get going with it, which I hope we'll do as soon as possible. People will be congratulating us for the decision we took to build that subway in years to come.
That's about 20,000 apartments, if I'm not incorrect. Yeah, well, that's what the plan.
Okay, Councillor Kyrgianis.
Thousands of apartments and thousands of jobs and all kinds of opportunities for people in Scarborough. And long-awaited transit they've been waiting for decades. Pardon me?
Councillor, ask the question and wait for the answer and stop interrupting.
I'm not going to tell you, Madam Speaker, what my thinking is, but I'm going to ask the Mayor through you the question. Never mind also. I'm not his master's voice. Through the Speaker, what about the 20,000 units that are going to be built along Shepherd? Isn't that going to be a mecca? Don't you think that deserves more than 4 lines?
What I, Madam Speaker, through you,
that's going to be billions of dollars also.
In answer to questions from this honourable member before is the following, which is that at the present time, we have an approved transit plan. We fought hard to get one. We didn't have one when I came to office. There wasn't one. There had been plans cancelled. There were people that wanted to change plans, but there wasn't a plan. We have one today. We know what the elements of it are. We've been working really hard as a team with our officials to move that plan forward, and we've made great progress. And I've said to the member before, through you, Madam Speaker, that I am not in a position where I can sort of have our public servants or the province reviewing every one of those plans that are not included in the present plan in detail at this time. They have indicated in their documentation an interest in looking at the line you're making reference to, the councillor is, Madam Speaker, namely a Shepherd, completion of the gap. And if they want to look at that and they're going to raise that at our table, of course we'll discuss that with them, because I've said we're there in good faith, our representatives, to discuss all the different things we all want to discuss and hopefully come up with a package that can serve the best interests of the people of Toronto. So I'm not saying it's not my job to rule in or rule out anything on that list. It's up to the council and it's up to the province to try and agree.
My last question through the chair, if I may. Is Shepherd going to be a mecca? And is that what you're going to say when you come to turning the sod along Shepherd or any developments?
Madam Speaker, through you, all I can say is this. I want to leave office, whenever that is, in the coming years, a long time from now. I want to leave office having turned Scarborough and all parts of Toronto so that everybody can enjoy the same kind of success and the same kind of investment, the same kind of confidence, the same kind of transit service, the same kind of access to opportunity that other parts of the city have. And that is simply saying that we've got to lift the whole city up so that, and we're at the point now in terms of housing availability, land for land to put jobs on and so on, where we need to have every part of the city benefiting from investments we make in transit, in housing, and these kinds of things. And that is my objective. And that will make Scarborough a mecca, and other parts of the city as well, including North York and including Etobicoke, and that will be good for Toronto.
Thank you. Councillor Perks to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. I will be supporting the motion made by Mayor Tory. I think that I do that not believing for a moment that anything that the province has proposed will ever get built. Quite frankly, Donald Trump will get his border wall before we see any of this. And I also don't, I'm not supporting it because I believe that the province is at the table in good faith. We set out some principles about transparency and including the public in consultation, and the province has gone the route of secrecy and then dropping plans without talking to anybody about them. They have ignored this council's decisions on transit and overridden them, and without any warning, they have gone and cut $1.1 billion out of urgently needed capital repairs. None of that is good faith. But I think it's time to call the province's bluff. Call their bluff. You know what, Mr. Mayor, if you won't join me out in the protests, call their bluff and call it now. The list of questions prepared by the city manager, I can tell you right now, they don't have answers to them. There may be a couple where they have some preliminary work done, but you heard our staff tell us how long it takes to do decent transit planning. It doesn't take 3 months, doesn't take 2 weeks. It takes years. It takes years. It's okay. For today, we'll find some common ground. I think we should walk away from the table because they've already shown bad faith, but I'll walk with you. I'll walk with you till June. And if by June they haven't shown us that they have a legitimately costed plan, and they haven't shown us that they have proper design, and they haven't shown us that they're actually prepared to put in the money to build that Ontario line, which I think is impossible, then we walk away. Then we say that's enough. That's enough. You are really in bad faith now. But more important than any of that, I want to take you back to the answers that we heard from our staff from the TTC. If they had a choice between building something new and maintaining what we've got, they would maintain what we've got. They would keep it in a state of good repair. They would improve the amount of rolling stock that we have, and they would run it with more frequent service, getting maximum value out of the built infrastructure and serving more people faster. Now, we've heard previously that the TTC feels that to do that, they need about $20 billion. And for those of you who recall, the deal always used to be that the province of Ontario would pay 3/4 of the capital cost and we would pay 1/4. Well, let's take a look at how much money they put on the table. They put $11 billion. That's not 3/4. They're not willing to come back and even put up the money necessary for us to maintain the system that we've got. So knowing that, and knowing that the priority is the state of good repair, the rolling stock, and operating service frequently, and knowing the province hasn't set aside enough money to do that, you can reason for yourself that we will be back here in June knowing that the province is not serious about transit. But if that's not good enough for you, I want to tell you the real reason why we urgently have to call their bluff now. For those of you who served on council at the same time as Doug Ford, you will remember that he stood, I think right there, over and over and over again, saying he was going to get us an extension of the Shepherd subway all the way to Scarborough Town Centre for free. For free. Now, if you go and stand at the intersection of Shepherd and Victoria Park, where Doug Ford promised us there would be a subway station, you will see what his current transit plan will look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and 30 years from now. There will be nothing there. There is no subway station there. The Ontario line will never be built. There will not be an underground extension of the Eglinton East line. There will not be 3 stops on the Shepherd or the Scarborough subway, and there will be nothing built up Yonge Street. None of it is going to happen at all. But if in order for this council to show unity in getting the Premier to answer questions, serious questions about his intention, we have to collectively take the bow risk and work together. In that metaphor, you're Prime Minister Mulroney. We have to take the bow risk and work together. Let's do it for now, but let's commit to each other. When we come back in June and there's nothing there, it's time to leave the table.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Matlow to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion that is just about to be put up on the screen. There was a technical problem at the clerk's desk. My motion, I'll just describe it as they do this. What it essentially does is it replaces the subway scheme with the evidence-based LRT plan to build 24 stations in Scarborough. The reason I do this is because for the same amount that we would be, I believe, misspending on providing, whether it goes to 1 stop or 3 stops, we could not only fund an RT replacement that could be built quicker and provide service to residents of Scarborough, providing more service for fewer dollars to more people, but could be built quicker without delays and actually move forward on providing them transit so they don't have to wait on the bus during reconstruction of waiting for a subway to be built. It also funds the 17-stop LRT line, the Eglinton East, to U of T Scarborough. What this also does is that evidence has demonstrated that the extension of Malvern is better served through the 7-stop RT replacement than going out east and then going back. It's less time on the bus for Malvern residents. So this plan is my, I guess the way I phrased it to a friend earlier today is that, even when people do the wrong things in life, sometimes, their last wish is to maybe do the right thing. And this is our opportunity to advocate to the province that we want to make the evidence-based decision to use every tax dollar well and wisely and provide the best service to as many people as possible in Scarborough to change their lives. When I was asking the mayor earlier about, his comments about the 3-stop subway, he said I was kind of coming up with words. Here are his words. Mayor Tory said in 2016, the original 3-stop subway was approved by City Council without the support of any planning or design work actually having been done. In fact, it was based on a sketch on a piece of paper given to the TTC. Every expert we've ever heard from has said that that is not a good scheme. It is not a good way to support residents in Scarborough. It is not a good use of tax dollars. But the LRT plan is. So whether it be to endorse or to even to consider to endorse a plan that isn't honest, that we heard about through a press conference that Doug Ford and his members made, I think is reckless and irresponsible. I do support the concept of asking the detailed, difficult, technical questions, arriving at what the truth is, and then potentially looking at what pieces we endorse and what we don't. For example, at first blush, it doesn't make sense to me, for example, to bury the Eglinton West. It doesn't make sense to me to move forward with a 3-stop subway out in Scarborough. It makes more sense to do the LRT plan to me. There are aspects of the Ontario line, though, that do seem to have merit. Now, there's many more questions we have to ask, but there are aspects of it that do seem to make sense. In fact, most experts would agree that actually we should have always been, at least whom I've heard from, we've always should be considering going up to Eglinton as part of Phase 1. If there's technology like light metro, potentially, that can actually provide more service for fewer dollars, that could be driverless, that's something we should be entertaining. That's something we should be considering. I don't understand the leg to Ontario Place unless there's an exhibition/Ontario Place redevelopment that could benefit from that we're not aware of those plans. I don't know those plans. But then we start considering what we endorse and what we don't based on the evidence in front of us. But what's going to happen now is we're going to go in and we're going to conditionally endorse, and that's how it's going to be inferred by some people. It's definitely going to be inferred by Doug Ford that way. And do you remember the way that the Scarborough subway issue got out of hand was when Glenn de Bearmaker, Mark Toohey basically wrote a ruling on behalf of the clerks, gave it to the speaker, allowed something that wasn't in order to be in order. Then it was essentially an endorsement in principle of a Scarborough subway without a plan, without a line, without knowing where it would go, without a budget, and things snowballed. What I'm concerned about is that if we even consider going out there endorsing, even in principle, a plan that doesn't actually make sense in its totality, it will be used politically and it will snowball. And we've already seen the Board of Trade and others start announcing that we are allocating all these dollars. So finally, let's do the right thing and take a position that is principled,
Thank
not
you.
endorsing something in principle that doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson to speak.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I've got a couple motions I'd like to share with Council. The first is this, related to, the relief line. And so it's a bit of a safety net, I would say, this motion, and I hope that you'll support it. Basically, as a young line councillor for 8 years, I've been talking about the relief line over the course of my short political career. And we're now at a point where it's become critical to maintain really the safety and the reliability of the transit system. Many of you know Line 1 is the busiest transit line in North America. And on average, about 730,000 riders use Line 1 every weekday.
Councillor Robinson, can you present your motion?
Oh, yes, I did. There's one. There's the second. It's coming. There's the other one. So this is about reinstating the promised provincial gas tax increase to the TTC. So this happened actually last Thursday afternoon when the provincial budget was released, as we were sitting in a TTC board meeting where we've lost $1.1 billion over the next 10 years for our state of good repair. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for reminding me about the second motion. So on the first motion, again, 730,000 riders, historical maximums of number of riders per hour. These are all very important statistics that we think about as we go through this process. And basically, we've been told, we've been advised our current plans really could have been ready to roll for procurement and construction by next year, 2020. So I want to ensure through this motion that any additional complications of extending the line, wherever it's extended to, west, north, that will not lead to any significant delays. We've heard the Mayor say that over and over again till he's blue in the face. Delays, delays, delays. So any way to curb that is very important. And then on my second motion, as I've introduced it, just to reinstate that funding that's so critical to our core business. I know we're talking a lot in recent weeks about transit expansion, but we can never forget about our core service and let it deteriorate. So $585 million has already been budgeted into the TTC's capital plan for from 2019 through to 2028 for state of good repair. And we're counting on this funding for our major capital projects, the T1 fleet overhaul, the bus improvements, track upgrades, basic core services. These projects are critical to addressing capacity and maintaining service on our whole network. And I understand it's not particularly politically rewarding to talk about state of good repair, but it's very important to us as a city. The list of unfunded projects have grown every year since 2014, and we have a massive state of good repair backlog. The number that you heard earlier today is $33 billion plus. $23.7 billion of that is unfunded. So we can't ignore, the need of we cannot fund expansion while ignoring our core services, and we have to find that sustainable funding. Again, as I mentioned last week in the TTC board meeting, we were literally, many of us in this room, sitting around the table, listening to a very impressive presentation by the TTC staff, talking about Line 1 capacity enhancement program to the tune of $9 billion. That's the price tag. So currently we're running about 25 trains. We want to get up to 30. We hit that once. But we have a phased plan to permit modest capacity increases. We have a plan. But without this critical investment, we'd really be compromising customer safety, certainly by the mid-2020s, absolutely by the mid-2020s. So to conclude, I just want to make it clear, despite my many reservations about the provincial plans, we have more questions than answers. I will be supporting staff recommendations. As the City Manager confirmed today, it's critical we submit our PTIF funding before the federal government breaks before the election. And simply put, we need to move forward on building these projects for the future of our city.
Thank you. So we have time for one more. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to start by saying I'm open to any proposal that is going to fund and build transit in this city faster. But I'm not convinced what the province has presented us with is necessarily a plan to do that. What we have today is 61 questions that need to be answered. What we have is $15.4 million of sunk costs on the relief line and nearly $200 million sunk costs on the Scarborough extension. And most recently, what we have with the budget announcement is a $1.1 billion cut to the state of good repair funding for the TTC. That's really concerning. It took us 3 to 4 years to get the TPAP done on the relief line, as we heard today. And the new proposal from the province, the Ontario line, would cross the Don Valley not once but twice. So, surely common sense would suggest that that's going to require extensive study to resolve. And I think that's important. It was always our intention to use the Greenwood Yard for the relief line for maintenance, but this proposal would require us to find a new site, maybe up as much as 40 acres. And certainly in a city like Toronto, 40 acres, easier said than done to come by that. Lastly, I would say that the province is proposing a smaller, lighter vehicle. That's what we've heard. This is curious too, in that we are servicing an area where demand has actually supported the relief line since the 80s. That's what when we look at the data on the Young line and the Bloor line, this could be justified since the 1980s. That was 40 years ago. So, it's concerning to move forward with a proposal for smaller vehicles where demand in the downtown is perhaps going to be our highest. With all that said, I think what we're really here to do is focus on action. That's what people elected us to do. That's what we need to do here. And the time to build transit in Toronto is of course now. The city manager really had an important message for all of us, I think, on page 8 of this report. And that was, there is no authority to proceed to procure and construct the one-stop Line 2 extension project in the absence of all parties agreeing to proceed. So basically, to get anything built, we actually need to work together. We can't do this alone, but neither can they. I would just add that we really do need to keep moving forward on this. We have to ask the critical questions, and we have to push for our objectives, our transit plan that we have here in the City of Toronto. That's why I'll be supporting Councillor Robinson and the Mayor's motions, and I think it's important at this point for us to get back to the table, get the answers to those 61 questions and maybe more that we need to actually make informed decisions going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Thompson, you have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
I do, Speaker, that leave be granted to introduce a bill to confirm, to the point of the introduction of this motion, the proceedings of City Council's meeting 6 on April 16, 2019.
Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill? Recorded vote.
Councillor Holyday, please. Councillor Layton. Councillor Bailao, please.
The motion to introduce the confirming bill carries unanimously, 23 in favor.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote.
Councillor Holyday. Councillor Madlow, please. Councillor Thompson, please.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Robinson, please.
Councillor Thompson.
Councillor Perks, please.
The motion to enact the confirming bill carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Okay, we're recessed to tomorrow at 9:30. Thank you.